The Wyoming sun beat down on Black Hollow Ridge like a punishment nobody deserved. Caleb Mercer had been standing on that wooden platform for 20 minutes, sweat collecting under his collar, watching the eastern horizon for smoke from the train. Around him, half the town pretended they weren't watching. Women adjusted their bonnets. Men leaned against posts with studied indifference. Everyone knew why Caleb was there. He'd been alone too long. That's what people said when they thought he couldn't hear. 5 years since his father died and left him the ranch. 5 years of brutal winters, dry summers, and nights so quiet they felt like suffocation. He was 32 years old and felt twice that. The mail order arrangement had seemed practical. He'd exchanged letters with a woman named Catherine Wells, a schoolteacher from Boston who wrote in careful, measured sentences about wanting a simpler life. Her handwriting was neat. Her expectations seemed reasonable. She understood frontier life wouldn't be easy. That's what her letter said, anyway. Caleb didn't expect love. He expected competence. Someone who could teach the settlement children, manage a household, survive the isolation without breaking. Someone steady. The train whistle cut through the afternoon heat. "Here we go," muttered Tom Rafferty, the depot manager, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Hope she's got thick skin, Mercer. Frontier ain't kind to city women." Caleb didn't answer. His hands were shaking, though he'd rather die than admit it. He'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Cleaned the ranch house, fixed the broken porch step, even bought new curtains from the general store. Mary Chen had raised her eyebrows at that purchase, but hadn't said anything. The train ground to a halt with a screech of metal and a cloud of steam. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. Passengers began stepping down. An old man with a cane. A family with 3 small children. A salesman carrying sample cases. No single woman. Then the conductor extended his hand toward the passenger car, and everything changed. The woman who took his hand wasn't delicate. She wasn't refined. She was enormous. Vivienne Ashcroft stepped onto the platform, and the entire town stopped breathing. She was easily 250 pounds, maybe more, packed into an expensive traveling dress that strained at every seam. Her face was flushed deep red from heat and exertion, sweat running down her neck in rivulets. Dark hair escaped from pins that were fighting a losing battle. Her breathing came hard and labored, but it was her eyes that hit Caleb first. Terrified, desperate, bracing for impact. Someone laughed. Caleb couldn't see who, but the sound spread like infection through the crowd. A woman gasped. Another whispered something behind her hand. 2 cowboys near the saloon nudged each other, grinning. "Jesus Christ," Tom Rafferty breathed beside him. "Is that—" "I don't know," Caleb said. His voice came out strangled. The woman, Vivienne, scanned the platform with those frightened eyes until they landed on him. She knew. Somehow she knew exactly who he was. Her expression shifted into something worse than fear, shame. She took 3 steps toward him, her heavy body moving with surprising grace despite the whispers cutting through the air around her. When she spoke, her voice was cultured, Eastern, nothing like the plain language he'd expected. "Mr. Mercer, I'm here about the arrangement. You're Catherine Wells?" The words came out harder than he meant them to. "No," she swallowed. "My name is Vivienne Ashcroft. There's been a deception. I need to explain." The laughter grew louder. Caleb felt his face burning. Every eye in Black Hollow Ridge was watching this moment, watching him get played for a fool in front of everyone. "Not here," he said through his teeth. "Get your bags." She had 3 trunks. 3. Each one looked expensive, covered in travel stickers from places Caleb had never been. It took 2 men to load them onto a wagon, both of them exchanging looks that made Caleb want to punch something. He didn't speak to her during the walk to the hotel, didn't look at her. The sound of her labored breathing followed him like an accusation. Martha's boarding house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story building that had seen better days. Martha Sutton herself answered the door, took one look at Vivienne, and her expression went carefully blank. "Need a room," Caleb said. "For the lady." "How long?" "However long it takes to get her back on a train heading east." If Vivienne flinched, he didn't let himself see it. Martha led them upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed and a washstand. The floorboards creaked under Vivienne's weight. She stood in the center of the room, still wearing her expensive dress, still sweating, still looking like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. "I'll need an explanation," Caleb said when Martha left. A real one. Vivienne's hands twisted together. They were soft hands. Useless hands. Everything about her screamed city, money, privilege, everything he'd told himself he didn't want. Catherine Wells was my cousin, she said quietly. She was supposed to come. She wanted to come. But 3 weeks ago she married someone else, a banker from Philadelphia. So you decided to steal her identity? I was desperate. The words came fast now, tumbling over each other. I had creditors in Boston, violent men. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, with money, with trust. They were coming for me. I had nowhere else to go. So you lied. Yes. You took my letters, my arrangements, my... He couldn't finish. The humiliation was choking him. I thought if I could just get here, explain in person, maybe you'd understand. Maybe what? Caleb's voice came out like gravel. Maybe I'd be so desperate for a wife I'd take anyone? Even someone who can barely walk across town without stopping to catch her breath? The cruelty in his own words hit him immediately, but he couldn't take them back. Didn't want to. Vivienne's face went white. For a moment, Caleb thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, an almost military gesture that looked strange on someone so soft. You're right, she said. I'm sorry I deceived you. I'll leave on the next train. That's 3 days from now. Then I'll stay here and keep out of your way until then. She turned away from him, facing the window, dismissing him. The gesture was so unexpected that Caleb just stood there, wrong-footed. The room's paid for, he said finally. 3 nights. After that, you're on your own. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs. Outside, the afternoon sun was starting to slant toward evening. Caleb walked past the general store, past the saloon, past the curious stares and barely hidden smirks. His jaw ached from clenching. 5 years of loneliness, and this was what he got. A liar in an expensive dress who'd probably never worked a day in her life, who looked at the frontier like it was going to eat her alive, and it probably would. He headed for the saloon. If there was ever a day for whiskey, this was it. By the next morning, the entire town knew the story. Or their version of it, anyway. Caleb heard the whispers when he came into Chen's general store for supplies. 2 women near the fabric section went quiet when he approached, then started up again the moment he passed. Can't believe she thought she could pass herself off. Poor Mr. Mercer. Waited all that time for... Won't last a week out here. Mary Chen, at least, had the decency to look sympathetic when she tallied his order. People talk too much in this town, she said quietly. They're not wrong, though. Caleb counted out coins. She lied, came here under false pretenses. Mary's expression stayed neutral. Still, must have taken courage, coming all this way alone. Courage or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Caleb took his supplies and left before the conversation could continue. He had work to do, fence repairs that wouldn't wait, livestock that needed tending. The ranch didn't care about his humiliation. He was halfway through fixing a broken gate when he heard horses approaching. 2 riders. Caleb recognized them both. Jack Morrison and Pete Hendricks. Hands from the double R spread north of town. Heard you had some excitement yesterday, Jack said, grinning. That true about the mail-order bride? None of your business. Come on, Mercer. Whole town's talking about it. They say she's big as a barn. They say she got off the train and the platform cracked, Pete added, laughing. Caleb's hands tightened on the fence post. You boys got nothing better to do than gossip like washwomen? Just saying, if you need help getting her back on that train, I don't need help. Now get off my property before I help you off. They left, still laughing, but the damage was done. Caleb spent the rest of the day in a black mood, taking his frustration out on manual labor until his shoulders screamed. He told himself he wouldn't go back to town, wouldn't check on her. She'd made her bed with lies. Let her lie in it. But that evening, as shadows stretched across the valley, he found himself riding toward Black Hollow Ridge anyway, just to make sure she hadn't caused any more trouble. That's what he told himself. Martha's boarding house was quiet. Caleb tied his horse and was heading for the door when he heard raised voices from the alley beside the building. Think you can just show up here and humiliate decent folks? Caleb rounded the corner and stopped. 3 women had Vivienne backed against the wall. Clara Foster, Rebecca Marsh, and young Sarah Hendricks, Pete's wife. They stood with arms crossed, faces hard with righteous anger. Vivienne looked smaller somehow, despite her size, cornered. "I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone," she said. Her voice shook but held steady. "I made a mistake. I'm leaving in 2 days." "2 days too long," Clara said. "You're making a mockery of this town, of Mr. Mercer. Dressing up in those fancy clothes, thinking you can come out here and play at being a frontier wife?" Rebecca's voice dripped with contempt. "Look at you. You can barely make it up a flight of stairs." "I never claimed. Women like you don't belong here," Sarah cut in. She couldn't have been more than 19, but her cruelty had the confidence of youth. "This land breaks strong women. What do you think it'll do to someone like you?" Caleb should have walked away, should have let them handle it. Vivienne had brought this on herself, but something about the scene stopped him. 3 against 1, the casual viciousness in their voices, the way Vivienne's hands shook even as she refused to back down. "That's enough," he heard himself say. All 4 women turned. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Mercer, we were just—" "I heard what you were doing." He stepped closer, putting himself between them and Vivienne. "She's leaving in 2 days. Until then, she's paid for her room, and she's under Martha's roof. That makes her a guest in this town." "A guest who lied to you," Rebecca said. "My business, not yours." He looked at each of them in turn. "Go home." They left, but not without backward glances that promised this conversation wasn't over. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Vivienne. She was breathing hard again, her face flushed, but her eyes were dry. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Didn't do it for you, did it? Because I don't like bullies." "Even when the target deserves it?" The question caught him off guard. He studied her face, really looked at her for the first time since the train platform. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 27, 28. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and old fears. "Nobody deserves that," he said finally. Something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like surprise that he'd said something decent. "Thank you anyway." She moved past him toward the boarding house entrance, her heavy footsteps careful on the uneven ground. At the door she paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Mercer, I am sorry. The letters Catherine wrote, they were real. She really did want this life. I wish I could have been her for you." Before he could respond, she disappeared inside. Caleb stood in the alley as dusk settled over the town, trying to figure out why his anger felt less certain than it had that morning. Oops. The next day brought trouble of a different kind. Caleb was shoeing his horse when Sheriff Coleman rode up, his face grim in a way that meant bad news. "We got a problem," Coleman said without preamble. 3 men rode in this morning asking questions about a woman from Boston. "Big woman," they said, "traveling with expensive luggage." Caleb's hand stilled on the horseshoe. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come with money owed and promises of violence if payment ain't made." Coleman dismounted, his weathered face troubled. "They're staying at the saloon, drinking heavy, talking about how they tracked her all the way from Massachusetts. They say what she owes? $5,000. Caleb whistled low. That was more money than most folks in Black Hollow Ridge would see in 5 years. "They say what it was for?" "Gambling debts, bad investments. Some story about her dead father's business going under and her trying to save it by borrowing from the wrong people." Coleman spat into the dirt. "Don't matter what it was for. These ain't the kind of men who care about excuses." "What do you want me to do about it?" "Nothing. Just thought you should know, seeing as she came here expecting to marry you." The sheriff's eyes were sharp. "They asked if I knew where she was staying. I told them I didn't know anything about any woman from Boston." "Why?" Coleman shrugged. "Because those men got killer eyes and I don't like the way they smile. Because that woman might be a liar, but she's still a person. And because I remember what it's like to be desperate enough to run." He rode off, leaving Caleb standing in his yard with a horseshoe in one hand and a decision weighing on him like stones. He could do nothing. It wasn't his problem. She'd lied to him, humiliated him, and in 2 days she'd be gone anyway. Whatever trouble she'd brought with her would leave with her. Or he could warn her. The afternoon sun climbed higher. Caleb finished with the horse, cleaned up, and found himself riding toward town again, cursing himself with every step. He found Vivienne in an unexpected place, the schoolhouse. The small building sat at the eastern edge of town, weathered wood and a crooked chimney. Through the window, Caleb could see her moving among the desks, her large frame surprisingly careful as she straightened benches and swept the floor. He dismounted and pushed open the door. She jumped, dropping the broom with a clatter. "Mr. Mercer, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. The door was open and I thought I needed something to do." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I'll leave." "Wait." He picked up the broom, handed it back. "You know how to teach? I was a governess. Before everything fell apart." She took the broom but didn't start sweeping again. "For wealthy families in Boston. It wasn't proper school teaching, but I know literature, mathematics, history. I can write clearly. I'm good with children." "Why were you a governess if your family had money?" Her expression shuddered. "My father had money. He died 2 years ago. The business failed. The money disappeared faster than I could track it. By the time I understood how bad things were, the creditors were already circling. So you borrowed to try and save it. From people who seemed kind at first, who offered help when the banks turned me away." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was naive, stupid. I thought I could manage it, pay them back, keep my father's legacy alive. Instead, I made everything worse. And now they've found you." Her face went white. "What?" "3 men rode into town this morning, looking for a woman matching your description. Sheriff says they're carrying guns and bad intentions." Vivienne sat down heavily on one of the small desks. The wood groaned under her weight. She stared at her hands, those soft, useless hands, and Caleb watched her breathing accelerate into something close to panic. "I brought this to your town," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I hoped I'd lost them, that they'd given up." "Men like that don't give up when there's money involved. I'll leave tonight, before they find me. I can take a wagon south, catch a train from the next settlement. They'll be watching the roads." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Her voice cracked. "I can't pay them. I don't have anything left. And if they find me—" She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. Caleb had seen men like the ones Coleman described. They didn't make empty threats. "Stay inside," he said. Don't leave the boarding house. Martha's tough. She won't let them in without cause." "Why are you helping me?" It was the second time she'd asked a variation of that question. Caleb still didn't have a good answer. "Because running's not going to solve this," he said finally, "and because nobody deserves what those men will do, no matter what they owe." He left before she could respond, but he felt her eyes on him all the way to his horse. That evening, the confrontation came. Caleb was at the saloon, not drinking, just watching, when the 3 men made their entrance. They had the look of hired muscle dressed up in nice clothes, expensive guns, cruel smiles, and the kind of confidence that came from never losing a fight. The leader was a man named Silas Crow, tall, lean, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He walked straight to the bar and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looking for a woman. Big woman. Can't miss her. Came in on the train 2 days ago. Anyone seen her?" The saloon went quiet. Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Town gets a lot of travelers," the bartender said carefully. "Can't say I keep track of all of them. She owes us money. A lot of money." Crow's smile was all teeth. "We've been chasing her halfway across the country. Be a shame if good folks got caught in the middle of our business." "That a threat?" Sheriff Coleman stepped out of the shadows near the back door. He'd been waiting. "Just a statement of fact, Sheriff. We're reasonable men. We get what we're owed. We leave peacefully. Simple as that. And if you don't get what you're owed," Crow's smile widened, "then things get complicated." The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Caleb's hand drifted toward his hip, where his revolver sat in its holster. "I'll ask around," Coleman said neutrally. "If anyone matching that description is in town, I'll let you know. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you boys kept the peace." "Of course, Sheriff. We're law-abiding citizens." Crow tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "We'll be at the hotel if anyone remembers anything helpful." They left, but the threat lingered behind them like smoke. Coleman caught Caleb's eye and jerked his head toward the door. Outside, under the cover of darkness, the sheriff's diplomatic mask dropped. "This is going to get ugly," he said. "Those men aren't leaving without her or blood. Probably both. So what do we do?" "We? There's no we here, Mercer. She's not your wife, not your responsibility. She came here because of me. She came here because she was running. You were just the convenient destination." Coleman pulled out a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands. "I'm too old for this. This town's too small for this. We got maybe 6 men who can shoot straight, and half of them would rather hide than fight. You gonna hand her over?" "I'm gonna try like hell to keep everyone alive." Coleman took a long drag. "But if it comes down to her or this town, I know which one I'm choosing." Caleb understood. He'd make the same choice. This was frontier justice, cold, practical, and unforgiving. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Vivienne's face in that alley, backed against a wall, refusing to cry even as the world closed in around her. "Give me 2 days," he heard himself say. "Let me figure something out." 2 days until what? "I don't know yet." Coleman laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You're a fool, Mercer." "Probably. And if you're thinking about doing something stupid, I'm not thinking. That's the problem." He walked back to the boarding house through streets gone quiet with fear. Light glowed in Vivienne's window on the second floor. He could see her shadow moving behind the curtain, pacing probably, wearing down the floorboards with worry. Caleb had spent 5 years alone by choice. 5 years telling himself he didn't need anyone, that the frontier was better faced solo without the complication of hearts and promises. But standing in the darkness, watching that window, he felt something shift inside him. Not love. He didn't know her well enough for that. Not even really sympathy. Maybe it was just recognition of what it looked like when someone had nothing left to lose except their life. And even that seemed like a questionable prize. He turned away from the boarding house and headed home. 2 days. He had 2 days to figure out how to save a woman who'd lied to him, humiliated him, and brought violence to his doorstep. The worst part was, he was actually going to try. The next morning, Caleb woke to pounding on his door. It was barely dawn, the sky just starting to lighten from black to gray. He grabbed his rifle and yanked the door open to find Martha Sutton standing on his porch, her face pale with fear. "She's gone," Martha gasped. "Vivienne, her room's empty, bed not slept in. Her bags are still there, but she's gone." Caleb's blood went cold. "When?" "I don't know. I checked on her last night around 10. She was there then. This morning, nothing. Did those men—" "I don't know. I didn't hear anything. But Mr. Mercer, if they took her—" Caleb was already moving, grabbing his coat and boots. "Alert the sheriff. Get a search started. Check every building in town." "Where are you going?" "To find her before they do." He saddled his horse in record time and rode toward town, his mind racing. If Crow had her, she was probably already dead. Men like that didn't leave witnesses. But if she'd run on her own— the schoolhouse. The thought hit him like lightning. Yesterday, she'd been there, found some peace in that small, empty building. He pushed his horse faster, reaching the school just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. The door stood slightly ajar. Caleb dismounted, rifle ready, and pushed inside. Vivienne sat at the teacher's desk, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "You're alive," Caleb said, and the relief in his voice surprised him. She looked up, face blotchy and wet with tears. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those men finding me, hurting people in this town because of my debts. I thought if I left before dawn, headed south on foot, maybe they'd chase me and leave everyone else alone." "On foot? You wouldn't make it 5 miles before they caught you." "Better me than innocent people dying for my mistakes." Caleb lowered the rifle, studying her. The expensive dress was wrinkled now, stained with sweat and dirt. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins. She looked exhausted, terrified, and somehow still defiant. "Why'd you stop?" he asked. "You made it this far. Why not keep going?" Vivienne laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "Because I'm a coward. Because the darkness was too much, and I was too afraid, and I realized I don't want to die alone in the wilderness. I'd rather face those men than—" Her voice broke. She put her face back in her hands. Caleb should have been angry, should have dragged her back to town and let Coleman handle it. Instead, He found himself crossing the room, pulling up a small chair that creaked under his weight, and sitting across from her. "Tell me about the money," he said quietly. "What?" $5,000. That's a lot of debt. Tell me how it happened." She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Why does it matter?" "Because if I'm going to help you, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." "You're going to help me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" "Don't know yet. Maybe I'm as stupid as you are." He leaned back, the chair protesting. "Start talking." So she did. The story came out in fits and starts. A father who'd built a shipping business from nothing, who'd taught his daughter everything about commerce and trade, who died suddenly and left her in charge of a company she didn't fully understand. Debts she didn't know existed. Partners who disappeared. Investors who demanded payment. "I tried to keep it together," she said. "Sold everything we owned, the house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry. But it wasn't enough. The business was collapsing and I was drowning. So you borrowed from Crow." He seemed legitimate at first. He had an office, references. He said he helped people in difficult situations. Her hands twisted in her lap. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, I'd already signed papers I couldn't escape from. "And when you couldn't pay?" "He sent men to my home. They were polite at first, courteous even, but there was something in their eyes. Something that told me politeness wouldn't last." She swallowed hard. "That's when I knew I had to run." "So you stole your cousin's identity and came here?" "Catherine was my only family left. She'd been writing to you for months, excited about starting over. When she told me she wasn't coming, that she'd chosen her banker instead, I saw a chance, a way out, a selfish way out." Vivienne's eyes flashed with anger for the first time. "Yes, it was selfish. It was desperate and wrong, and I hurt you in the process. But I'm not going to apologize for trying to survive." The fire in her voice caught Caleb off guard. For a moment, he glimpsed something beneath the fear and shame, something harder, stubborn. "Those men," he said slowly, "they're not going to stop. Even if you had the money, they'd probably kill you anyway. Can't leave witnesses when you're running an illegal lending operation." "I know. And you can't outrun them. They've tracked you this far. They'll track you anywhere." "I know that too." "So what's your plan?" She laughed again, that same broken sound. "I don't have one. I'm a coward who ran out of road." Caleb stood up, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Outside, he could hear the town waking up. Voices calling, horses moving, the ordinary sounds of life continuing despite the violence hanging over them all. "Come on," he said. "We're going back to town." "So they can find me?" "So we can figure out how to stop them." She stared at him. "You have a plan?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it." It was a lie. He had nothing. But as he watched Vivienne pull herself to her feet, watched her struggle with her own weight and exhaustion and fear, but still managed to stand, Caleb realized something had changed. He'd stopped seeing her as the woman who'd humiliated him, started seeing her as a person who'd made terrible choices while trying to survive impossible circumstances. He still didn't like her, didn't trust her. But respect? That was starting to creep in around the edges. They walked back to town together as the sun climbed higher. By the time they reached Martha's boarding house, word had spread that Vivienne was safe. A small crowd had gathered, some concerned, most just curious. Sheriff Coleman pushed through them, his expression dark. "Need to talk to you, Mercer. Private." They stepped into the boarding house parlor. Martha shooed everyone else out. "Crow's getting impatient," Coleman said without preamble. "He's asking questions, making threats. Says if we don't produce the woman by tomorrow, he's going to start assuming we're hiding her. And when men like Crow start making assumptions, people die." "Then we give her to him," Caleb heard himself say. Both Coleman and Vivienne, who'd followed them inside, stared at him. "What?" she whispered. "We give you to him, but on our terms. Public place. Witnesses. We negotiate." "There's no negotiation with men like that," Coleman interrupted. "Then we make him think there is. We buy time. We what, Mercer? We're not gunfighters. We're farmers and ranchers and shopkeepers. Even if we wanted to fight, I'm not asking anyone to fight. I'm asking for time to figure this out." The room fell silent. Through the window, Caleb could see townspeople gathering, whispering, fear spreading like disease. 24 hours, Coleman said finally. That's all I can give you. After that, I got a town to protect. He left, and Caleb was alone with Vivienne and the weight of a promise he didn't know how to keep. Why are you doing this? She asked again. Third time now. This time, Caleb had an answer. Because 5 years ago, I watched my father die slowly from a sickness that ate him from the inside. Every day, people in this town would visit, bring food, offer help, but none of them could stop him from dying. He met her eyes. You know what he told me? Right before the end? He said the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the loneliness. The feeling that nobody really saw him anymore, just his sickness. I don't understand. Everyone in this town sees your size, your lies, your debts. They don't see you. He grabbed his hat from the table. Maybe I don't either, but I'm trying to. And that's got to count for something. He walked out before she could respond, leaving her standing in the parlor with tears running down her face and the first fragile hope she'd felt in months burning in her chest. Outside, Black Hollow Ridge waited, small, scared, and completely unaware that the next 24 hours would change everything. The 24 hours Coleman gave them felt like sand slipping through fingers. Caleb spent the morning riding between ranches, trying to gauge who might stand with him if things turned violent. The answers weren't encouraging. Most men listened politely, then found excuses. They had families to protect, livestock that needed tending, old injuries that made fighting impossible. Tom Rafferty was the most honest about it. They stood in his barn, the smell of hay and horse sweat thick in the air, and the depot manager didn't bother with pleasantries. I got 3 daughters, Mercer. What happens to them if I get killed over some woman's gambling debts? What happens to them when men like Crow decide this town's an easy target? Caleb shot back. You think they'll stop with Vivienne? You think they won't come back? Maybe, maybe not. But that's a future problem. Right now, I got present problems that don't include dying for a stranger. Caleb couldn't argue with that logic. He'd have said the same thing a week ago. By noon, he'd found exactly 3 men willing to help. Young Billy Chen, Mary's nephew who was 19 and stupid brave. Jack Morrison, who'd apparently felt guilty about his earlier mockery. And Samuel Brooks, an ex-Army scout who was too old to care about dying anymore. 4 men against 3 professional killers. The math didn't work. Caleb found Coleman at the jail, cleaning his rifle with the methodical movements of someone preparing for war. Got a plan yet? The sheriff asked without looking up. Working on it. Time's running out. I know. Coleman finally met his eyes. You're going to get yourself killed over this woman. You know that, right? Probably. And for what? She lied to you, used you. She's not even pretty enough to make dying for her romantic. The cruelty in that statement hung between them. Caleb felt anger flash hot in his chest, but Coleman's expression stayed neutral, just stating facts as he saw them. Beauty's got nothing to do with it, Caleb said quietly. Then what does? Principle, maybe, or stupidity. Haven't decided which. He left before Coleman could respond, heading back toward the boarding house. Vivienne had stayed inside all morning like he'd told her, but that didn't stop the town from talking. Every corner he passed, Caleb heard whispers, bringing trouble down on all of us. Mercer's lost his mind over that woman. Should just hand her over and be done with it. The fear was spreading faster than disease. By evening, it would be panic. By morning, the town would demand Coleman take action. Caleb was running out of time and options. He found Vivienne in the boarding house kitchen helping Martha prepare dinner. The sight stopped him in the doorway. This wealthy woman from Boston, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour, working dough like she'd done it her whole life. Martha saw him first. She insisted on helping, said she needed something to do or she'd go crazy. Vivienne looked up, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. I'm not very good at this. The bread keeps sticking. You're doing fine, Martha said, surprising both of them. The older woman had been cold to Vivienne since she arrived, but something had shifted. Better than fine, actually. Most city women wouldn't even try. Caleb cleared his throat. Need to talk to her. Alone. Martha nodded and disappeared into the pantry. Vivienne wiped her hands on her apron, one of Martha's too small for her frame, and faced him with that same braced expression she'd worn on the train platform. You haven't found help, she said. Not a question. No. How many men? 4, including me. Against 3 trained killers. She laughed, but it came out shaky. Those are terrible odds. I've had worse. When? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. I'm working on a plan. Stop. Vivienne's voice turned hard. Stop lying to make me feel better. There is no plan, is there? You're going to stand between me and those men and you're going to die, and it'll be my fault. Nobody's dying. Everyone's dying. The words burst out of her, loud enough that Martha probably heard from the pantry. You, the men helping you, maybe people in this town who have nothing to do with my mistakes. All because I was too much of a coward to face consequences back in Boston. So what do you want me to do? Hand you over? Yes. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. Yes. Let me face them. Let me end this before anyone else gets hurt. They'll kill you. I know. And you're okay with that? Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, her flour-covered hands twisting together. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been dead inside for 2 years, Mr. Mercer, ever since my father died and I realized I couldn't save his legacy, couldn't save anything. She met his eyes. At least this way, my death might mean something, might save this town from violence. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's practical. It's giving up. What else is there? Her voice rose again. I can't fight them. I can barely walk upstairs without getting winded. I'm not some frontier woman who can shoot and ride and survive. I'm just... What? Say it. I'm just a fat, useless woman who's been a burden everywhere she goes. The words echoed in the kitchen. Martha's movements in the pantry stopped. Caleb stepped closer, forcing Vivienne to look at him. You think that's what I see when I look at you? It's what everyone sees. No, it's what you've been told to see. He gestured toward the bread dough. I see someone who's trying. Someone who showed up in a town that hates her and is still looking for ways to be useful. Someone who's terrified but hasn't run away yet. I tried to run away last night. But you stopped. That counts. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, cutting tracks through the flour dust on her face. Why are you being kind to me? Because someone should be. And because... He stopped, surprised by what he was about to say. Because I think you're stronger than you know. You just haven't had a reason to find out yet. Before she could respond, the door crashed open. Billy Chen burst in, his young face pale with fear. Mr. Mercer, they're at the saloon. Crow and his men. They're asking for you. The moment had arrived sooner than expected. Caleb turned to Vivienne. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Coleman. Please don't do this, she whispered. Don't have a choice. He left before she could argue, following Billy into the street. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, turning Black Hollow Ridge into sharp shadows and blinding light. People had cleared off the main road, watching from windows and doorways. The saloon doors swung open and Silas Crow stepped out, flanked by his 2 men. They'd been drinking. Caleb could see it in the loose way they moved, but not enough to make them careless. Mr. Mercer, Crow called out, his scarred face splitting into a smile. Been looking for you. Thought we might have a conversation about that woman you've been hiding. Not hiding anyone? No? Crow took 3 steps forward, his men spread out, hands near their guns. Because I heard she came here to marry you, heard she's been staying at the boarding house under your protection. She's a guest in this town, that's all. A guest who owes us $5,000. Crow's smile never wavered. Now, we're reasonable men. We don't want trouble, just want what's owed to us. She doesn't have it. Then she can work it off. We know several establishments back east that would pay good money for an exotic worker. Big woman like that? Certain men pay extra. The implication hit Caleb like a fist. Around him he heard gasps from the watching townspeople. That's not happening, Caleb said quietly. Then she dies, and anyone who gets in our way dies with her. Crow's hand drifted to his gun. That include you, Mr. Mercer? If it has to. The street went silent. Caleb was aware of movement to his left. Billy Chen taking position near the general store, rifle in hand. To his right, Jack Morrison emerged from the alley. Samuel Brooks stepped out of the sheriff's office, shotgun cradled in his arms. 4 against 3. Still terrible odds. This is foolish, Crow said, but his smile had faded. You're going to die for a woman who lied to you? Who brought trouble to your town? Seems like. Why? It was the same question everyone kept asking. Caleb was tired of not having a good answer. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I'm tired of watching people get crushed by men like you. Crow's expression hardened. His hand moved toward his gun. Then Sheriff Coleman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's enough. The sheriff stepped into the street, badge glinting in the sunlight. He looked old and tired and completely done with this situation. You boys have made your point, Coleman said. But this is my town, and I don't allow gunfights in the street. You want the woman, you go through legal channels. File a claim. Get a judge involved. We did that back east, Crow said. Legal process is slow. We prefer efficiency. I'm sure you do, but Wyoming law says you can't just execute debtors without a trial. Coleman's hand rested on his own gun. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to the saloon. We're going to send for a territorial judge, and we're going to settle this proper. And how long will that take? Week, maybe 2. Crow laughed. We're not waiting 2 weeks. Then you're not getting the woman. Coleman's voice went flat and dangerous. And if you try to take her by force, you'll have to go through every man in this town. It was a bluff. Caleb knew it. Crow probably knew it too. But the uncertainty flickered across the gunman's face, calculating odds, measuring risks. 24 hours, Crow said finally. We'll give you 24 hours to produce her voluntarily. After that, we stop being polite. He turned and walked back into the saloon, his men following. The door swung shut behind them. Caleb felt like he could breathe again. Around him, the town exhaled collectively. That bought us time, Coleman said quietly. But not much. You better figure something out fast, Mercer. Working on it. Work faster. Caleb headed back to the boarding house, his mind racing. They had 1 day. 1 day to figure out how to stop 3 killers or watch Vivienne die. He found her exactly where he'd left her, standing in the kitchen with Martha's arm around her shoulders. She'd heard everything through the window. Thank you, she whispered when she saw him. Thank you for... Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. But you stood up for me, against those men. Nobody's ever... Her voice broke. Martha guided her to a chair. Sit down before you fall down, girl. Vivienne sat heavily, her breathing labored. The stress was taking its toll on her body. Caleb could see it in the way her hands shook, the pallor beneath her flushed cheeks. You need to rest, he said. I need to help. There has to be something I can do. You can stay alive. That's enough. But as he said it, an idea began forming in the back of his mind. Crazy. Dangerous. Probably impossible. Actually, he said slowly, there might be something. Both women looked at him. Crow wants his money, right? That's what this is really about. The violence, the threats. It's all just leverage to get paid. I don't have $5,000, Vivienne said. I told you. But what if we could make him think you do? How? Caleb's mind was working faster now, pieces clicking together. This town has money. Not a lot, but enough. The bank has deposits from ranchers, merchants. If we could steal from the bank? Vivienne looked horrified. Borrow. Temporarily. He turned to Martha. How much could we raise if we asked people to contribute? Told them it was to save the town from violence? Martha's expression was skeptical. You saw how they reacted earlier. Most folks would rather hand her over than risk their savings. But some wouldn't. Some would help if they thought it would end this peacefully. It won't end peacefully, Vivienne said. Even if I had the money, Crow would just take it and kill me anyway. He can't leave witnesses. Not if we do it public. Not if we make it a legal transaction with Coleman as witness. That's insane. You got a better idea? The room fell silent. Through the window, Caleb could see the sun starting its descent toward the western mountains. Hours slipping away. I'll talk to people, Martha said finally. See what I can raise. But don't get your hopes up, Mr. Mercer. Fear makes folks selfish. She left, and Caleb was alone with Vivienne again. This won't work, she said quietly. You know that, right? Probably not. So why try? Because the alternative is watching you die, and I've seen enough death to last a lifetime. She studied his face, searching for something. You didn't even like me 3 days ago. You were angry, humiliated. Still am, a little. Then why? Because anger's easy. It's safe. Lets you keep everyone at a distance. Caleb pulled up a chair, its legs scraping against the floorboards. My father used to say that the measure of a man wasn't how he treated people who pleased him. It was how he treated people who disappointed him. I definitely disappointed you. Yeah, you did. He met her eyes. But I'm starting to think maybe I disappointed myself more. Spent 5 years alone because I was too afraid to let anyone close enough to hurt me. Then you showed up, the exact opposite of what I thought I wanted. And you terrified me. I terrified you? Not your size. Not your lies. Your need. Your desperation. It reminded me that people are messy and complicated, and they bring problems you can't solve with hard work and isolation. Vivienne's laugh was soft and sad. I'm definitely messy and complicated. Yeah, you are. He stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. He made it to the door before she spoke again. Mr. Mercer? Caleb? He turned. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if something happens to you because of me, I want you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. The lies, the trouble, everything. If it goes wrong tomorrow, you won't have time to be sorry. You'll be too busy running. I won't run. Not anymore. There was something in her voice that made Caleb believe her, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Good, he said, because the frontier doesn't respect runners, but it might respect someone stubborn enough to stand their ground. He left her sitting in the kitchen, the last rays of sunlight painting the walls gold and red. That evening, Caleb met with the handful of men willing to help. They gathered in Samuel Brooks's barn, away from prying eyes and gossip. Martha's raised about $300, Caleb told them. People are scared. Most won't contribute. 300's not even close to 5,000, Billy Chen said. The young man's enthusiasm from earlier had faded into nervous reality. I know, but if we could convince Crow it's a down payment, buy more time to raise the rest. He won't buy it, Samuel interrupted. The old scout had seen too many cons to fall for optimism. Men like Crow know when they're being played. He'll take the 300 and still kill her. So what do you suggest? We fight. Tomorrow, when he comes for her, we make a stand. 4 against 3? Jack Morrison shook his head. I'm brave, but I'm not suicidal. Then what? Billy's voice cracked with frustration. We just let them take her? The question hung in the air. Caleb looked at each man's face. Young Billy trying to be brave. Jack wrestling with guilt and fear. Samuel too tired to care about dying, but still showing up anyway. I don't know, Caleb admitted, but I'm not giving up yet. They talked for another hour, running through scenarios that all ended badly. By the time they dispersed, the moon was high, and Caleb was no closer to a solution. He rode home slowly, his mind churning. Somewhere between the barn and his ranch, exhaustion hit him like a wave. He hadn't slept properly in 2 days. His body ached from tension and stress, but when he finally collapsed into bed, sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw tomorrow playing out in a dozen violent variations. All of them ended with blood in the street. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to pounding on his door again. Dawn light streamed through the windows. This time it was Coleman, and his face told Caleb everything he needed to know before the sheriff even spoke. They're making their move. Now. Didn't wait for the deadline. Caleb was up and dressed in seconds, grabbing his gun belt. Where? Heading toward the boarding house, whole town's watching. They rode hard towards Black Hollow Ridge, Caleb's heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. No more time for plans or strategies. Whatever happened next would be improvised and desperate. The scene that greeted them in town was worse than he'd imagined. Crow and his men had Vivienne outside the boarding house, forcing her toward their horses. Martha stood in the doorway, her face bloodied. She'd tried to stop them and gotten hit for it. Vivienne's hands were bound. She stumbled as they dragged her, her size making movement difficult. But she wasn't crying, wasn't begging. Her face was set in grim determination. Let her go, Caleb shouted, dismounting at a run. Crow turned, that scarred smile back in place. We waited long enough. Time for talking's over. You got 12 hours left on your deadline. We changed our minds. Crow pressed his gun against Vivienne's temple. Now back off, or I end this right here. The street was packed with townspeople, all watching in horrified silence. Caleb saw families, children, people he'd known his whole life. None of them were stepping forward to help. This was it, the moment where he had to decide if his principles were worth dying for. He drew his gun. Last chance, Crow said. Walk away or watch her die. Can't do that. Then you're a fool. 3 things happened simultaneously. Billy Chen opened fire from the general store rooftop. His shot went wild, but it broke the standoff's frozen moment. Samuel Brooks rushed from the alley with his shotgun. And Vivienne, bound hands and all, drove her elbow backward into Crow's stomach with enough force to make him grunt and loosen his grip. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Caleb dove for cover behind a water trough, returning fire toward Crow's men. Glass shattered as bullets punched through storefronts. Horses screamed and bolted. Through the smoke and confusion, Caleb saw Vivienne hit the ground hard, rolling toward the boarding house porch. Martha grabbed her and pulled her inside. One of Crow's men went down, Samuel's shotgun finding its target, but the old scout took a bullet to the leg and collapsed, cursing. Jack Morrison fired from behind a wagon, his shots forcing Crow's remaining man to retreat toward the saloon, and Crow himself, furious now, advanced on Caleb's position with his gun blazing. Caleb felt a bullet slice past his ear, so close he felt the heat. He aimed carefully, squeezed the trigger. Crow jerked backward, blood blooming on his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to slow him down. The gunman's eyes widened with shock and rage. "You'll pay for that, Mercer." "Get out of my town," Caleb said, his gun steady on Crow's chest. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the blood-spattered street. Crow's remaining man was already running toward their horses. Samuel sat against a post, clutching his bleeding leg, but with his shotgun still aimed and ready. Crow calculated the odds. 1 man dead, himself wounded, facing 4 armed men who'd proven they'd actually fight. "This isn't over," he spat. "She still owes. We'll be back. Then we'll be ready." Crow backed toward his horse, keeping his gun up. His remaining man helped him mount, and together they rode out of town at a gallop, leaving a trail of dust and blood behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb's hands were shaking. His ears rang from gunfire. Around him, the town slowly emerged from hiding, staring at the destruction. Broken windows, blood in the dirt, a dead man sprawled in the street. "Samuel!" Caleb rushed to the old scout. The leg wound was bad but not fatal if they got it treated quickly. "I'm fine," Samuel growled. "Check on the girl." Caleb ran to the boarding house. Martha met him at the door, her face still bleeding but her eyes fierce. "She's inside. She's alive." He found Vivienne sitting on the floor, her bound hands finally cut free, her whole body shaking with shock and adrenaline. When she saw him, something broke in her expression. "You're alive," she whispered. "So are you." "That man, one of them is dead because of me. He's dead because he chose violence. That's not on you." But Vivienne was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole frame. Martha knelt beside her, pulling her into an embrace that looked awkward given their size difference, but was clearly needed. Caleb stepped outside, giving them privacy. Coleman was already organizing the cleanup, removing the body, tending to Samuel's wound, calming the panicked townspeople. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen," the sheriff said when Caleb approached. "You could have gotten everyone killed." "But we didn't." "This time. Crow's coming back, Mercer. He said so himself, and next time he'll bring more men. Then we'll deal with it when it happens." Coleman shook his head. "You've changed. Few days ago, you'd have agreed with me. Would have said the smart play was to hand her over and avoid the fight." "Few days ago, I was wrong about a lot of things." The sheriff studied him. "You falling for her? That what this is about?" "I barely know her." "That's not an answer." Caleb didn't have an answer. What he felt was too complicated to name. Not love, not yet anyway. But something was shifting inside him, old walls crumbling, old fears losing their grip. "She's staying," he said finally. "Whatever comes next, she's staying in this town, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." Word spread fast. By evening, everyone in Black Hollow Ridge knew what had happened. The reactions were mixed. Some people called Caleb a hero, others called him a fool. Most just looked scared, wondering when Crow would return and how much blood would be spilled. Caleb found Vivienne still at the boarding house, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Martha had cleaned the blood from her own face and was bustling around pretending everything was normal. "How are you?" Caleb asked.
"I don't know." Vivienne's voice was hollow. "A man died today. Because of my debts, because I was stupid and desperate and—" "Stop." Caleb pulled up a chair. "That man died because he chose to work for someone like Crow. He knew what he was signing up for. That doesn't make it better." "No, but it makes it not your fault." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why do you keep defending me? Even now, after all this?" "Because you're worth defending, even if you don't see it yet. I'm not worth dying for." "Everyone's worth dying for if the cause is right." He reached across the table, hesitated, then took her hand. Her fingers were cold. "You think you're weak because your body doesn't fit what people expect. But I watched you today. You didn't freeze, didn't beg. You fought back even with your hands tied. I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway." Vivienne's fingers tightened around his. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to find a permanent solution. And if we can't, then we go down fighting." It was a grim promise, but Vivienne seemed to draw strength from it. She straightened in her chair, some of the hollowness leaving her eyes. "I want to help," she said. "Really help. Not just hide while people risk their lives for me." "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet. But there has to be something I can do. Some way to make this right." Caleb nodded slowly. An idea was forming, crazy, dangerous, but maybe possible. "Can you shoot?" he asked. "No." "Can you ride?" "Barely." "Can you think strategically, plan ahead?" Vivienne's expression shifted. "Yes, that I can do. I managed my father's business for 2 years. I'm good with numbers, logistics, seeing patterns." "Then start thinking. Crow will come back, but he'll need time to regroup. Find more men. Plan his approach. If we can figure out his strategy before he implements it, we might be able to counter it." Vivienne's eyes lit up with the first genuine interest Caleb had seen in her. "I need maps, information about the area, any intelligence on Crow's operation. I'll get you what I can find." She stood up, moving with new purpose despite her exhaustion. "And I need to talk to people, find out what they know, what they've heard, build a complete picture." "Town's not exactly friendly to you right now." "Then I'll have to change that." Her jaw set with determination. "If I'm going to stay here, if this is going to be my home, I need to earn their trust. That's not going to be easy." "Nothing about my life has been easy, Mr. Mercer. I'm used to it." She walked past him toward her room, her heavy footsteps purposeful now instead of defeated. Caleb watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest. 3 days ago, she'd stepped off that train, desperate, frightened, carrying nothing but lies and debts. Now she was still desperate and frightened, still carrying debts that might get everyone killed. But she was also standing her ground, fighting back, becoming something the frontier might not break after all. Outside, night settled over Black Hollow Ridge. Somewhere out there, Silas Crow was planning his return, gathering men and resources for the violence to come. But here, in this small town that had tried to reject her, Vivienne Ashcroft was planning too. And Caleb was starting to think that might be enough to tip the scales. He hoped so anyway, because the alternative was everyone dying, and he'd gotten surprisingly attached to staying alive. Even if it meant defending a woman who'd lied to him, humiliated him, and turned his entire life upside down in less than a week. The frontier had a funny way of showing you what really mattered, usually by trying to kill you until you figured it out. The first test came 2 days later when Margaret Henley's youngest boy broke his arm. Caleb was at the boarding house going over rough maps of the territory with Vivienne when Martha burst in, her face tight with worry. "It's the Henley boy, Tommy, fell out of the barn loft, arms bent wrong and Margaret's beside herself. Doc Patterson's 3 towns over delivering a baby and won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest." Vivienne looked up from the maps, her expression shifting immediately. "How bad is the break?" "Bad enough that the bone's showing through the skin." Martha's voice wavered. "Margaret's trying to keep him calm, but he's screaming and there's blood everywhere." "I can help," Vivienne said, already standing. I studied basic medical care when I worked for the Ashford family in Boston. Their son had epilepsy. I learned to handle emergencies. Martha's skepticism was written across her face. You know how to set bones? I've assisted with it twice. It's not ideal, but it's better than letting the boy suffer until tomorrow. Margaret won't want you near her son, Martha said bluntly. Half the town still blames you for the shooting. The other half thinks you're bad luck. Then don't tell her who's helping until after it's done. Vivienne grabbed her shawl. Where's the house? Martha looked at Caleb, uncertain. He stood up, making the decision for all of them. I'll take you. If Margaret has a problem with it, she can take it up with me after her son's arm is fixed. They rode together on Caleb's horse, Vivienne sitting behind him, her weight shifting the animal's gait, but not enough to slow them down. She didn't speak during the ride, and Caleb could feel the tension in her body. Not fear exactly, but the nervous energy of someone preparing for a fight. The Henley place was a modest homestead on the eastern edge of the settlement. They could hear Tommy's screams before they even reached the door. Margaret Henley was a hard woman, made harder by frontier life. She'd buried 2 children already, and her face showed every moment of that grief. When she opened the door and saw Vivienne, her expression went cold. No, absolutely not. Mrs. Henley, Caleb started. I said no. I don't want that woman near my boy. Your boy's in agony and the bones exposed, Vivienne said, her voice calm despite Margaret's hostility. Every minute we wait increases the risk of infection. I can help him. You brought violence to this town. You got a man killed. Why would I trust you with my son's life? Because I'm all you've got right now, Vivienne said simply. And because I know what I'm doing. Another scream pierced the air from inside the house. Margaret flinched, her resolve cracking. If he dies, if anything happens to him because of you, then you can blame me for the rest of my life, Vivienne said. But let me try. Margaret stepped aside. The scene inside was worse than Caleb had imagined. Tommy Henley was 8 years old, small for his age, and his right arm was twisted at an angle that made Caleb's stomach turn. The bone had torn through the skin just below the elbow. Blood soaked the kitchen table where they'd laid him. Vivienne took one look and her entire demeanor changed. The uncertain, apologetic woman disappeared. In her place stood someone focused and competent. I need clean water, cloth for bandages, and the strongest whiskey you have, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Also wooden splints, 2 pieces about this long. She held her hands apart to demonstrate. And I need everyone except Mr. Mercer to leave the room. I'm not leaving my son, Margaret started. You're terrified and he can feel it. That's making him more frightened. Vivienne's voice was firm, but not unkind. I need you to trust me for the next 10 minutes. Can you do that? Margaret looked at her son's twisted arm, at the blood, at the bone showing white through torn skin. She looked at Vivienne's steady hands and certain expression. 10 minutes, she whispered, and left the room. Caleb had seen injuries before. Ranch work was brutal, and accidents were common, but he'd never seen someone work with the calm efficiency Vivienne displayed. She cleaned the wound first, her large hands surprisingly gentle as Tommy whimpered and tried to pull away. I know it hurts, she murmured. I know, but we're going to fix it. You're being so brave. It hurts so much, Tommy sobbed. I know, sweetheart. Here, drink this. She held a cup of whiskey-laced water to his lips. Just a few sips. It'll help with the pain. While Tommy drank, Vivienne examined the break carefully, her fingers probing around the wound. Caleb saw her expression tighten. It was worse than she'd let on. I need you to hold his shoulders, she told Caleb quietly. When I set this, he's going to try to jerk away. Don't let him. Caleb positioned himself, placing firm hands on Tommy's small shoulders. The boy was already crying, his face pale with pain and fear. Tommy, look at me, Vivienne said, waiting until his eyes focused on her. This is going to hurt. I won't lie to you. But it'll only hurt for a moment, and then it'll feel so much better. Can you be brave for just a little longer? Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face. Close your eyes and count to 10. Can you do that for me? I'll try. Good boy. Start counting. Tommy began counting in a shaky voice. On 3, Vivienne pulled the bone back into alignment with a swift, sure movement. Tommy's scream was terrible. He tried to thrash, but Caleb held him firm. Vivienne worked quickly, cleaning the wound again,
applying pressure to stop the bleeding, then carefully splinting the arm in place. By the time Tommy reached 10 in his counting, the worst was over.
All done, Vivienne said softly. You were so brave. The bravest boy I've ever met. Tommy's sobs were quieter now, more from shock and exhaustion than pain. Vivienne wrapped the arm in clean bandages, her movements precise and practiced. The bone's set, but he needs to see the doctor tomorrow to make sure everything's aligned properly, she told Caleb. And the wound needs to be watched for infection. Change the bandages twice daily, keep it clean. Margaret burst back into the room before Caleb could respond. She rushed to her son, gathering him into her arms as carefully as she could manage. Will he? He'll be fine, Vivienne said, washing her blood-stained hands in the basin. The break was clean. As long as infection doesn't set in, he should heal completely. Margaret looked at her son's bandaged arm, at his tear-stained face, at Vivienne's calm expression. Something shifted in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I'm sorry for what I said, about not trusting you. You were protecting your son, I understand. No, I've been cruel. We all have been. And you just saved Tommy's life when you could have turned us away. Vivienne gathered her shawl, preparing to leave. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because he needed help. But as they walked toward the door, Margaret called out again. Miss Ashcroft. Vivienne turned. You're welcome in my home anytime, and I'll make sure others know what you did here today. The ride back to town was quiet. Vivienne sat behind Caleb again, but this time he could feel her shaking, not from fear, but from the delayed reaction to what she'd just done. You were incredible back there, he said. I was terrified. What if I'd made it worse? What if... But you didn't. You saved that boy's arm, maybe his life. I just did what needed to be done. Most people can't do that. They freeze. But you didn't. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that competence was its own kind of courage, that doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared, is what separates survivors from victims. Smart man. He was. I wish I'd been smart enough to save his business, to not let him down. You didn't let him down. You tried. That's more than most people would have done. They reached the boarding house as evening settled over the town. Vivienne slid off the horse, wincing as her feet hit the ground. The ride had been hard on her. Caleb could see it in the way she moved. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll keep working on those maps. But word of what happened at the Henley place spread faster than Caleb expected. By the next morning, 3 more families had shown up at the boarding house asking for Vivienne's help with various ailments. A colicky baby, an infected wound, a woman with a fever that wouldn't break. Vivienne treated them all, her knowledge from years as a governess proving more valuable than anyone had anticipated. She didn't have formal medical training, but she had practical experience and a calm presence that people responded to. Martha watched the parade of visitors with raised eyebrows. Looks like you've found yourself a new purpose, girl. I'm just helping where I can, Vivienne said, but Caleb could see the change in her. She stood straighter now, spoke with more confidence. The town was starting to see her differently, but not everyone was ready to forgive. A week after the incident at the Henley place, Caleb was at the general store when he overheard 2 ranchers talking near the seed bins. Don't care if she fixed some kid's arm, one of them growled. She's still the reason Crow's coming back with more men. Still, the reason we're all in danger. Margaret Henley seems to think she's worth protecting now. Margaret Henley's grateful. Gratitude makes people stupid. Caleb stepped around the corner, making his presence known. Both men fell silent. Something you want to say to me, Garrett? Caleb asked the first rancher. Garrett had the decency to look uncomfortable. No offense, Mercer, but you've tied this town's fate to that woman. When Crow comes back, if Crow comes back, we'll deal with it. You mean you'll deal with it? Rest of us are just supposed to hope we don't get caught in the crossfire. Then help. Stand with us instead of complaining. I got a family to protect. Can't do that if I'm dead. It was the same argument Caleb had heard a dozen times. Fear was corrosive. It ate away at community, turned neighbors into strangers. He left the store without buying anything, his mood dark. Outside, he nearly ran into Vivienne coming out of the dressmaker's shop. She was carrying a bundle of fabric,
her face flushed from exertion. "What's that?" he asked. "Material for new clothes. Martha helped me take measurements. My old dresses don't fit the life I'm living now." She paused. "I heard what Garrett said in there. I was right outside the window." "Garrett's afraid. They all are." "They should be. I am." Vivienne shifted the bundle to her other arm. "But I'm tired of fear making decisions for me. I spent 2 years in Boston being afraid of losing my father's business, afraid of the creditors, afraid of what people thought of me. I'm done with it." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to help defend this town when Crow comes back, and I'm going to make sure people understand I'm not running anymore." Before Caleb could respond, a rider thundered into town from the east. Young Billy Chen, covered in dust and riding hard. "Mr. Mercer! Sheriff Coleman!" Billy was shouting before he even dismounted. "Trouble at the Morrison Ranch. Fire in the barn and livestock scattered everywhere." Caleb felt his blood go cold. "Crow?" "Don't know for sure, but Jack said he saw 3 riders heading north right before the fire started." It was beginning Crow's revenge. Within an hour, half the town had ridden out to the Morrison place. The barn was beyond saving. Flames had consumed most of the structure before anyone could arrive with buckets. Jack and his wife Sarah stood watching their livelihood burn, their faces hollow with shock. "Lost everything," Jack said numbly. "The hay, the equipment, 10 head of cattle that were penned inside." "Did you see who did it?" Coleman asked. 3 men on horseback rode up, threw something through the barn door, and rode off before I could get my rifle." Jack's hands were shaking. "This is because I helped you, isn't it, Mercer? Because I stood with you against Crow?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Caleb couldn't deny it. "I'll help you rebuild," he said. "Whatever it costs." "Rebuild with what?" Sarah Morrison's voice was sharp with anger and fear. "We put everything we had into this place. The barn, the livestock, it's gone. We're ruined. We'll figure something out." "You already figured something out. You figured out how to protect that woman and drag the rest of us down with you." Other men were nodding. Even those who'd been sympathetic to Vivienne were looking at the burning barn and doing calculations in their heads. How much would it cost them to stay loyal? Was anyone's life worth this? Coleman pulled Caleb aside, out of earshot of the growing crowd. "This is going to turn," the sheriff said quietly. "People are already scared. Now Crow's shown he can strike at anyone who helped you. By tomorrow, you won't have any allies left. So what do you suggest?" "Same thing I've been suggesting. Give him the woman." "No?" "Mercer, be reasonable." "I said no." Coleman's expression hardened. "Then you're on your own. I've got a whole town to protect. I can't do that if I'm choosing sides." He walked away, leaving Caleb standing alone while the barn collapsed in on itself with a shower of sparks. Vivienne was waiting at the boarding house when Caleb returned. She'd heard about the fire. Everyone had. "They're turning against us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. You should let me go. End this before anyone else gets hurt." "Where would you go?" "Anywhere. Doesn't matter." She was pacing now, her heavy footsteps wearing a path in the floorboards. "I could head south, catch a train from Colorado. Crow would follow me and leave this town alone. And then he'd kill you somewhere between here and there, and it would all be for nothing. At least you'd be safe. These people would be safe." Caleb grabbed her arm, stopping her pacing. "Listen to me. Crow's not going to leave this town alone whether you're here or not. He's already made enemies, already shown weakness by retreating the first time. Men like that don't forgive. They escalate. So what do? We get ready to fight." "With what army? You heard Coleman. Nobody's standing with us anymore." "Then we fight alone if we have to." Vivienne pulled her arm free, her eyes searching his face. "Why? Why keep doing this? You don't owe me anything. You could walk away right now and nobody would blame you." "I'd blame me. That's not good enough. I need to understand why you're willing to die for someone who lied to you, used you, brought nothing but trouble. Because you're worth it," Caleb said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, I stopped seeing you as a problem and started seeing you as a person who's trying despite everything, who's helping people despite them hating you, who's scared but standing anyway. That doesn't make me worth dying for." "Maybe not to you, but to me." He stepped closer. "I've spent 5 years alone because I was too afraid to let anyone matter.
too afraid to risk getting hurt. You showed up and reminded me what it costs to live that way, what you lose when you stop caring about anything except safety. You barely know me.
I know enough. I know you're stubborn and brave and smarter than you give yourself credit for. I know you stayed in that kitchen and helped Martha even when the town wanted you gone. I know you fixed Tommy Henley's arm when you could have let him suffer. I know you're not the woman who stepped off that train. You're becoming someone stronger. Vivienne's eyes were wet. What if I'm not strong enough? What if when Crow comes back I freeze? What if I get you killed? Then we die trying, but at least we'll die fighting for something that matters. Before she could respond, Martha came rushing in, her face pale. It's Samuel Brooks. He's taken a turn for the worse. That leg wound from the shooting, it's infected. Doc Patterson's trying to save the leg, but it's bad. They rushed to the doctor's office, a small building at the edge of town that smelled of carbolic and blood. Doc Patterson was an old man with shaky hands and whiskey on his breath, but he was the only medical help for 50 miles. Samuel lay on the examination table, his face gray with pain and fever. The leg wound had turned angry red, streaked with black lines that spoke of spreading infection. I've done what I can, Patterson said. But without proper antibiotics, the infection's going to kill him. Might take the leg too if it spreads much further. What do you need? Vivienne asked, stepping forward. Patterson looked at her with surprise. You got medical training? Some. Enough to assist. Then I need you to hold him down while I clean this wound again. It's going to hurt like hell and he's going to fight. For the next 3 hours, Vivienne worked alongside Doc Patterson, following his instructions with steady hands while Samuel screamed and cursed. She never flinched, never hesitated, never showed the exhaustion that Caleb could see building in her eyes. By the time they finished, Samuel was unconscious from pain and whiskey. The infection wasn't gone, but they'd fought it back from the brink. He might make it, Patterson said, washing his hands. Might not. Next 24 hours will tell. He looked at Vivienne with something approaching respect. You did good work here. Where'd you learn medical care? Boston. I was a governess for families with sick children. Governess? Patterson snorted. Fancy word for nurse. Well, if you're staying in this town, I could use the help. Getting too old to do this alone. I'm staying, Vivienne said, and Caleb heard the certainty in her voice. They left Samuel in Patterson's care and walked back toward the boarding house. Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. You haven't slept, Caleb observed. Neither have you. I'm used to it. You're not. Vivienne laughed, a tired sound. I'm getting used to a lot of things I never thought I'd have to. Exhaustion's the least of it. They reached the boarding house to find a crowd gathered outside. At first, Caleb thought it was trouble, more angry townspeople demanding action. Then he saw Margaret Henley at the front, holding her son's good hand. Miss Ashcroft, Margaret called out. We heard about what you did for Samuel Brooks. Worked all night trying to save his leg. Doc Patterson did most of the work, Vivienne said carefully. That's not what he told us. Margaret stepped forward. We wanted you to know, some of us anyway, that we're grateful. For Tommy, for Samuel, for trying to help even when we've been cruel to you. Other voices chimed in. Women Vivienne had helped with sick children, men whose injuries she'd tended. Not the whole town, not even close, but enough to matter. We can't fight Crow for you, Margaret continued, her voice shaking. Most of us aren't fighters. We're farmers, mothers, people just trying to survive. But we can help in other ways, food, supplies, information, whatever you need. It wasn't an army, it wasn't even real protection. But it was something, a shift in the wind, a crack in the wall of hostility. Vivienne's voice was thick when she spoke. Thank you. That means more than you know. The crowd dispersed, leaving Caleb and Vivienne alone on the boarding house steps. You're winning them over, Caleb said. Not enough of them, and not fast enough. But despite her words, Vivienne was smiling, the first genuine smile Caleb had seen since she arrived. 2 days later, the second attack came. This time it was the town's water supply. Someone poisoned the main well with dead animals, making it unusable. It would take weeks to dig a new one, and in the meantime, Black Hollow Ridge would have to haul water from the river 3 miles away. The message was clear. Crow could strike anywhere, anytime. He could make life unbearable until the town gave up Vivienne or drove her out themselves. That evening, Caleb called a meeting at the church. Nearly the whole town showed up, curious, frightened, angry. Garrett stood up first, his face red with fury. "This has got to stop, Mercer. First Morrison's barn, now the well. What's next? Our homes? Our children?" "Crow's trying to turn you against each other," Caleb said. "Can't you see that? He wants you scared and divided." "We are scared. And we're scared because you're protecting a woman who isn't worth this much trouble. She saved lives in this town," someone else called out. It was Margaret Henley, standing near the back. "She fixed my boy's arm, helped with Samuel Brooks, tended to sick children. What have you done lately, Garrett?" "I've kept my family safe by not making enemies of killers." The argument erupted into shouting matches across the room. Coleman tried to restore order, but nobody was listening anymore. Then Vivienne stood up. The room didn't go quiet immediately. It took several seconds for people to notice. But when they did, the silence was absolute. "You're right to be angry," Vivienne said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "This is my fault. I brought this trouble here. I lied to Mr. Mercer, I ran from my debts, and now you're all paying the price for my mistakes." "Finally, someone's making sense," Garrett muttered. "But I'm not leaving," Vivienne continued, and the room erupted again. "You have to... You're going to get us all killed." "Let her finish," Martha's voice cut through the chaos. "Let the girl speak." Vivienne waited for quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "I'm not leaving because running didn't work the first time. It won't work now. Crow will follow me wherever I go, and he'll keep hurting people until he gets what he wants. The only way to end this is to stop him, permanently." "And how do you propose we do that?" Coleman asked. "We got maybe 6 men who can shoot straight, and that's if we're generous with the definition. We don't fight him head on, we outsmart him." "Outsmart him how?" Vivienne pulled out the maps she and Caleb had been studying. Crow's operation isn't just about collecting debts. He's running smuggled goods through this territory. Opium, stolen merchandise, maybe weapons. That's why he has resources to keep coming back. He's not just a loan shark. He's a criminal with supply lines and distribution networks. The room was silent now, everyone listening. If we can find his supply route and cut it off, we remove his power. Without resources, he can't hire more men, can't sustain attacks. He becomes just another bully instead of a real threat. "How do you know about supply routes?" someone asked suspiciously. "Because I ran my father's shipping business for 2 years. I know how logistics work, how criminals hide contraband in legitimate shipments. And I've been asking questions, gathering information." Vivienne pointed to marks on the map. 3 separate people have mentioned seeing unmarked wagons moving through the canyon pass at odd hours. Always at night, always heavily guarded. That's not normal freight. Caleb leaned forward, studying the map. The canyon pass is 30 miles north, rough terrain, easy to defend. But difficult to maintain during winter, Vivienne said, which is coming soon. If we can block that pass or capture one of those wagons, we might find enough evidence to bring in federal marshals. Make this bigger than just a local problem. That's assuming we can even get close to those wagons without getting killed, Coleman said. But his tone had shifted from dismissive to thoughtful. "I volunteer to scout it out," Billy Chen said, standing up. "I know those canyons. Been hunting up there since I was 12. "I'll go with him," Jack Morrison added. "Owe it to Vivienne for what she did for Tommy. And owe it to myself to fight back instead of just letting my barn burn." Others started volunteering. Not everyone, but enough. The mood in the room had changed from hostile to cautiously hopeful. Garrett stood up, his expression sour. "This is crazy. You're all going to get yourselves killed chasing some fantasy about supply routes and federal marshals." "Maybe," Vivienne said. "But at least we'll be doing something instead of just waiting to die." The meeting broke up with no clear consensus, but something had shifted. People were talking to each other instead of just yelling, making plans instead of making accusations. Caleb caught up with Vivienne outside the church. That was risky, giving them hope when we don't even know if this plan will work. Hope's better than fear. Fear makes people cruel. She pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "And I meant what I said. I'm done running. Whatever happens next, I face it here. Even if it means dying? Even then. Because at least here, I'll die trying to protect something. That's more than I had in Boston." They walked back to the boarding house together. The streets quiet except for the sound of their footsteps. Somewhere in the darkness, Crow was planning his next move. But for the first time since this started, Caleb felt like they might actually have a chance. Not a good chance. Not even a particularly realistic one. But a chance nonetheless. And sometimes, on the frontier, that was all you got. Billy Chen and Jack Morrison left before dawn, heading north toward the canyon pass with enough supplies for 3 days of scouting. Caleb watched them ride out, a knot of worry tightening in his chest. "They'll be careful," Vivienne said beside him. She'd insisted on waking early to see them off, despite barely sleeping the night before. Careful doesn't matter if Crow's men spot them. Those canyons are a killing ground if you don't know what you're doing. Billy knows what he's doing. You said so yourself. Knowing and surviving aren't the same thing. They stood in silence as the riders disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. The town was still asleep, windows dark, streets empty. It felt peaceful in a way that Caleb knew was deceptive. "I should get back to the ranch," he said. "Got livestock that won't feed themselves." "Can I come with you?" The request surprised him. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of hiding in that boarding house. Because I want to see where you live. Because—" She stopped, looking uncomfortable. "Because I need to understand what kind of life I'm fighting for here." Caleb studied her face in the weak morning light. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was determination there too. "It's not fancy," he warned. "Just a working ranch, lots of mud and manure. I spent the last 2 weeks helping Martha scrub floors and empty chamber pots. I think I can handle mud." They rode out together as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. Vivienne sat behind Caleb again, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. He could feel her breathing against his back, the warmth of her body despite the cold morning air. The ranch looked rough in the early light. Caleb saw it through her eyes. The weathered house, the sagging barn roof he'd been meaning to fix, the scattered tools and equipment that needed organizing. 5 years of living alone had made him careless about appearances. "It's beautiful," Vivienne said, sliding off the horse. "You're lying." "No, I mean it. It's real. Honest." She turned slowly, taking in the valley, the mountains beyond, the vast emptiness that stretched in every direction. In Boston, everything was about appearances. Perfect houses, perfect manners, perfect lies. This is just life. Caleb dismounted, unsure how to respond to that. "Come on, I'll show you around before I start the morning work." The house was small, 3 rooms total. Living area with a stone fireplace, bedroom barely big enough for the bed, kitchen that was more of an alcove. But it was clean enough, and the roof didn't leak. "You built this yourself?" Vivienne asked, running her hand along the rough-hewn table. "My father and I built it together. Took 2 summers." Caleb started a fire in the stove. "Coffee?" "Please." They sat at the table while the coffee brewed, morning light streaming through the single window. Vivienne looked around the room, her expression thoughtful. "It must get lonely out here. All alone." "I got used to it. After my father died, I told myself I preferred the solitude." "And now?" "Now I'm not so sure." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. "Having you around, having people around, it's complicated, but it's not as terrible as I thought it would be." Vivienne smiled at that. "High praise. It's honest. I know. That's what I like about you. You don't say things you don't mean." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. Then Caleb showed her the ranch, the livestock pens, the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden that had gone wild with weeds. Vivienne followed, asking questions, genuinely interested. "Could you teach me?" she asked while they were feeding the chickens. "How to do this work? Why? You planning to become a rancher?" "I'm planning to be useful, to earn my place here." She scattered grain with unpracticed movements. The chickens scattered, then cautiously approached. "I've spent my whole life being ornamental. A governess is just a well-educated servant, really. I want to learn how to do real work." "This is real work, hard work. Your body—" "My body's strong," Vivienne interrupted, her voice sharp. "It's just big. There's a difference." Caleb held up his hands. Everyone assumes because I'm heavy that I'm weak, that I can't do physical labor. But I hauled water for Margaret Henley. I held Samuel Brooks down while Doc Patterson cut into his leg. I'm stronger than I look. I know you are." That stopped her. You do? I've watched you for 2 weeks now. Watched you work yourself to exhaustion, helping people who mostly hate you. Watched you stand up when you were terrified. Yeah, I know you're strong. Vivienne's expression softened. Then teach me, please. I want to know how to survive out here without depending on anyone. So he did. They spent the morning working together, mucking stalls, mending fence, checking livestock. Vivienne struggled with some tasks, her size making certain movements difficult. But she never complained, never quit. When she got winded climbing a fence, she just stopped to catch her breath and kept going. By noon, she was covered in dirt and sweat, her borrowed work dress stained beyond saving. But she was smiling. I did it, she said, looking at the repaired fence section with obvious pride. It's not pretty, but it'll hold. It's fine work for a first try. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I've seen men do worse on their 5th try. Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead. Come on, let's get some lunch before we both collapse. They ate simple food, bread, cheese, cold meat from the smokehouse. Vivienne devoured it like she was starving. This tastes better than anything I ate in Boston, she said. How is that possible? Because you earned it. Food always tastes better when you've worked for it. After lunch, they worked on smaller tasks, organizing tools, cleaning tack, preparing for winter. The conversation flowed easier now, less guarded. Tell me about your father, Vivienne said while they were sorting through old equipment. What was he like? Hard. Fair. Believed in doing things right the first time. Caleb held up a rusty hammer, decided it was beyond saving. He came out here with nothing, built this ranch from scratch, worked himself to death doing it. Do you resent him for that? For leaving you alone? Sometimes. Other times I'm grateful he taught me how to survive. Caleb tossed the hammer into the discard pile. What about your father? Brilliant, charming, terrible with money. Vivienne's smile was sad. He built a shipping empire through sheer force of personality, then lost it all because he trusted the wrong people. I spent 2 years trying to save something that was already dead. Should have let it go sooner. You were trying to honor his memory. I was trying to prove I was worthy of being his daughter, that I could be as smart and capable as he was. She laughed bitterly. Instead, I proved I was just as bad at business as he was. That's not true. Isn't it? I'm here, aren't I? Hiding from debts, bringing violence to innocent people? Caleb stopped working, forcing her to look at him. You're here because you survived. Because you were smart enough to run when you needed to, brave enough to stop running when it mattered. That's not failure. That's adaptation. You really believe that? I'm starting to. They worked until the sun started dropping toward the mountains. Vivienne was exhausted. Caleb could see it in the way she moved, the careful slowness of someone whose body had been pushed to its limits. We should head back, he said. Martha will worry. Can we stay a little longer? Just a few more minutes. Vivienne sat on a fence rail, looking out over the valley. It's so quiet here. Peaceful. I haven't felt peaceful in years. Caleb sat beside her, the old wood creaking under their combined weight. The evening light painted everything gold and amber, the mountains purple in the distance. You could stay, he heard himself say, not just in town. Here, on the ranch. Vivienne turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. What? I mean, after this is over, after we deal with Crow, if you wanted to stay, you could... He stopped, suddenly uncertain. I'm making a mess of this. Are you asking me to marry you? No. Maybe. I don't know. Caleb felt heat rising in his face. I'm asking if you'd consider staying, working the ranch together, seeing where it goes. You barely know me. I know enough. And you know me better than most people ever have. He met her eyes. I'm not promising romance or easy answers, just partnership. 2 people trying to survive together instead of alone. Vivienne was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, I'd like that. If we survive. When we survive. You sound certain. I'm hopeful. That's different, but it's something. They rode back to town as darkness fell, both lost in their own thoughts. The boarding house was lit up when they arrived, and Martha met them at the door with news. Billy and Jack are back. They found something. The two scouts were in the kitchen, dirty and exhausted but alive. Billy's face was flushed with excitement despite obvious fatigue. "We found the supply route," he said without preamble. Miss Ashcroft was right. There's wagons moving through the North Canyon, heavily guarded. We counted at least 8 men. "What were they carrying?" Caleb asked. "Couldn't get close enough to see for certain, but the wagons rode low. Heavy cargo." Jack pulled out a rough sketch he'd made. "They're using the old mining trail, the one everyone thought was abandoned. Comes out near the territorial border." Vivienne studied the sketch, her brow furrowed. "How often do they make runs?" "Looked like every 3 days, maybe 4. They time it for moonless nights, but we got lucky with our positioning." "Did they see you?" "Don't think so. We stayed well back, used the high ground." Coleman had arrived during the conversation. He looked at the sketch, his expression skeptical. "Even if this is real, what are we supposed to do about it? We can't take on 8 armed men." "We don't have to take them all on," Vivienne said. "We just need to stop one wagon, get proof of what they're carrying, then we contact the territorial marshal and make this their problem." "How do you propose we stop a wagon with 8 guards?" "We don't stop it in the canyon. Too easy to defend," Vivienne pointed to the sketch. "But here, where the trail narrows before the border crossing, there's only room for one wagon at a time. If we block the trail, they'd have to stop. And then what? They'd just shoot whoever's blocking it." "Not if we make it look like a natural rock slide. Not if we're positioned where they can't see us." Vivienne's mind was clearly working through possibilities. "We trigger a slide, stop the wagon, then hit them fast while they're confused. Take whatever cargo we can carry and get out before they can organize a response." "That's insane," Coleman said. "It's risky," Vivienne corrected, "but it might work. Might get us all killed. So we're doing nothing. Crow's not going to stop. He's already burned Morrison's barn, poisoned our well. Next it'll be homes, families. We fight now, or we die slowly." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was right, even if they didn't want to admit it. "I need to think about this," Coleman said finally. "Plan something like this carefully, or don't do it at all." Over the next 3 days, they planned. Caleb, Vivienne, Billy, Jack, and a handful of others who'd volunteered met secretly to work out details. Where to position themselves, how to trigger the rock slide, what to do if the guards fought back harder than expected. Vivienne proved surprisingly good at tactical planning. She'd studied military strategy as part of her education, knew how to think about positioning and timing. "The key is speed," she explained, using stones on a map to represent people in wagons. "We hit them while they're still reacting to the rock slide. Grab cargo, retreat to prepared positions. They'll chase us, but if we split up and meet at the rendezvous point—" "If they chase us, some of us won't make it to the rendezvous point," Samuel Brooks said. He was back on his feet, though still limping from his leg wound. "We need to be realistic about casualties." "Then we make sure everyone knows the risks before we go," Vivienne said quietly. "Nobody gets forced into this." But when the day came, everyone who'd volunteered showed up. They left before dawn on a cold morning that promised early snow. 8 people total: Caleb, Vivienne, Billy, Jack, Samuel, and 3 other ranchers who'd decided the risk was worth it. Vivienne rode her own horse now, a gentle mare that Caleb had borrowed from Martha's stable. She'd been practicing for days, and while she wasn't graceful, she could stay mounted. The ride north took most of the day. They pushed hard, knowing they had to reach the ambush point before the next supply run. Caleb kept glancing at Vivienne, worried about her stamina. But she kept pace, her jaw set with determination. When they stopped to rest the horses, she dismounted stiffly, but without complaint. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm terrified, but I'm okay. It's not too late to turn back. You could wait at the rendezvous point." "No, I got everyone into this. I see it through." They reached the ambush point as evening fell. The narrow section of trail was exactly as Billy had described. High rock walls on both sides, barely wide enough for a wagon. They spent the night preparing, loosening rocks above the trail, positioning themselves in hiding spots, rehearsing the plan until everyone knew their role. Vivienne would be with Caleb and Samuel on the high ground, ready to trigger the rock slide. Billy and Jack would be positioned to grab the cargo once the wagon stopped. The others would provide cover fire if needed. "Remember," Vivienne said during their final briefing, "we're not trying to kill anyone. We just want the cargo and evidence. Get in, get out, Don't be heroes. What if they don't give us a choice? One of the ranchers asked. Then you do what you have to do to survive. But unnecessary killing just makes us as bad as them. They settled into position as midnight approached. The temperature dropped, frost forming on the rocks. Caleb could see his breath in the moonless dark. Beside him, Vivienne was shaking, not from cold, but from nerves. He put a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be here. You've already done enough. I need to be here. Need to see this through. She met his eyes. And if something goes wrong, if I don't make it, don't talk like that. If I don't make it, she continued firmly, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been the best of my life, that you made me believe I was worth something again. Vivienne, shh, they're coming. Caleb heard it too, the sound of wheels and horses moving slowly through the darkness. His heart started hammering. The wagon came into view exactly as Billy had described, large, covered, riding low with heavy cargo. 8 guards surrounded it, rifles ready, eyes scanning the darkness. They were professionals. This wasn't going to be easy. Caleb looked at Vivienne. She nodded. He pulled the rope they'd rigged, and the carefully loosened rocks came crashing down onto the trail. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Horses screamed and reared. Men shouted. The wagon driver fought to control his team as rocks bounced around them. Now! Caleb shouted. Billy and Jack rushed from hiding, heading for the wagon, but the guards recovered faster than expected. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Caleb returned fire, trying to provide cover. Beside him, Samuel's shotgun boomed. Below, Billy reached the wagon and pulled back the canvas cover. Even in the darkness, Caleb could see his shocked expression. It's opium! Crates of it! More gunfire. One of the ranchers went down, clutching his arm. Jack grabbed a small crate and ran, but the guards were organizing now, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Bullets whined off rocks near Caleb's head. Fall back, he shouted. We got what we need. Everyone started retreating to their horses. Everyone except Vivienne. She was staring down at the wagon, at something Caleb couldn't see from his angle. Then she started moving down the slope toward it. What are you doing? Caleb shouted. Get back here! But Vivienne wasn't listening. She half slid, half climbed down to the wagon, ignoring the bullets, ignoring everything. Caleb cursed and followed her, his heart in his throat. He found her at the wagon, pulling back more of the canvas. Her face was pale with shock. There's a girl, she said. There's a girl in here. Caleb looked. Chained to the wagon bed was a young woman, maybe 16, filthy and terrified. Not the only one either. He could see at least 2 more figures huddled in the darkness. They're smuggling people, Vivienne breathed. Not just opium, people. A bullet splintered wood near Caleb's head. We need to go now. We can't leave them. We can't save them if we're dead. Vivienne grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. I'm not leaving them. I won't. Another bullet, closer this time. The guards were closing in and Caleb's people were already retreating. He made a decision he hoped he wouldn't regret. Samuel, he shouted up to the high ground. Cover us. Everyone else, get those people out of the wagon. It was chaos after that. Billy and Jack came back, shooting and running at the same time. Samuel's shotgun kept the guards back, but not for long. They pulled 3 young women from the wagon, breaking their chains with rifle butts. One of the guards got close enough that Caleb had to shoot him. The man went down, and Caleb felt sick but didn't stop moving. Go, 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 he shouted, pushing Vivienne toward her horse. They ran through the darkness, half carrying the freed captives, bullets chasing them. One of the ranchers took a hit to the leg but kept moving. Samuel covered their retreat, firing until his ammunition ran out. Somehow, impossibly, they made it to the horses. The ride back was a nightmare. They pushed the horses hard, the freed women sharing mounts, everyone looking over their shoulders for pursuit that thankfully never came. They didn't stop until they reached the rendezvous point, a small canyon 5 miles south. Only then did Caleb take stock. One rancher with a flesh wound to the arm, another with a bullet in his leg that would need surgery. Samuel exhausted, but alive. Everyone else bruised and terrified, but intact. And 3 young women who stared at them with hollow eyes that had seen too much. Vivienne dismounted and immediately went to them, speaking softly, checking for injuries. You're safe now, she told them. We're taking you somewhere safe. One of the girls, the youngest, started crying. Vivienne pulled her into an embrace, holding her while she sobbed. Caleb watched,
something shifting in his chest. This woman who'd arrived as a liar, a burden, someone to be mocked. She was risking everything for people she didn't even know. "We need to move," Billy said. "They might follow." "Let them," Samuel growled. "We got proof now. Opium, human trafficking. This is federal crime territory. Marshals will have to investigate." They rode through the night, reaching Black Hollow Ridge just as dawn broke. The town was waking up, and people stopped to stare at the bedraggled group riding in. Coleman met them in the street, his expression shifting from anger to shock as he saw the freed women. "What the hell happened up there?" "We found Crow's operation," Caleb said, dismounting. "And it's worse than we thought." Word spread fast. By noon, the whole town knew about the opium and the trafficking. The 3 rescued women stayed at the boarding house under Martha's protection, their stories slowly emerging over the next few days. They'd been taken from settlements across the territory, sold by their own desperate families, or simply kidnapped. They were being transported east to be sold again, to worse fates than they'd already endured. The town's attitude shifted overnight. Whatever resentment remained toward Vivienne evaporated in the face of what she'd helped uncover. "She didn't have to go up there," Margaret Henley said to a group gathered at the general store. "Could have stayed safe in town, but she risked her life to save those girls. Still brought Crow here in the first place," Garrett muttered, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Coleman sent word to the territorial marshal about what they'd found. The response came back within days. Federal agents were being dispatched to investigate, and they wanted everyone involved to give statements. But Crow knew what had happened, knew his operation was exposed, and he was coming for revenge. The attack came 3 days after the canyon raid. Caleb was at his ranch when he saw the smoke rising from town. Black, thick smoke that could only mean one thing: fire. He rode hard, his heart pounding. Please not the boarding house. Please not. But it wasn't the boarding house. It was worse. The school was burning, and according to frantic townspeople, there were children inside. Vivienne was already there when Caleb arrived, trying to get past the flames. Martha and 2 other women were holding her back. "Let me go," Vivienne was screaming. "There are children in there." "The door's blocked from outside," someone shouted. "We can't get to them." Caleb could hear them, small voices crying, screaming. The sound cut through him like a knife. "The back window," Billy Chen gasped, running up. "It's small, but—" "I can't fit through it," Jack said, already trying. "It's too narrow." Caleb tried next, got his shoulders wedged, and couldn't go further. The window was barely 2 feet wide. "I can fit." Everyone turned. Vivienne stood there, her face set with determination. "You can't," Martha started. "I can fit, and I'm going." Vivienne was already moving toward the back of the building. "Someone boost me up." "You'll die in there." Caleb grabbed her arm. "Those children will die if someone doesn't go." She pulled free. "I can do this. I have to do this." Caleb looked at her face and saw the same certainty he'd seen when she set Tommy Henley's arm. When she stood up to Crow's men, when she rode into danger at the canyon, he boosted her up to the window. Vivienne squeezed through, her size making it difficult but not impossible. She disappeared into the smoke-filled building. The next minutes were the longest of Caleb's life. He could hear her voice inside, calling to the children, calm despite the roar of flames. "Come to my voice. I've got you. Stay low." One by one, children started appearing at the window. Vivienne lifted them up, pushed them through to waiting arms outside. 6 kids. 7. 8. The roof was starting to collapse, burning timber falling inside. "Vivienne, get out!" Caleb shouted. "One more! There's one more! I've got her!" A little girl came through the window, coughing but alive. Then silence. "Vivienne." Nothing. "No." Caleb started for the building, but Jack and Billy grabbed him. "It's too late. The whole thing's coming down." Then Vivienne appeared at the window, her face black with soot, her clothes smoking. She tried to pull herself through but got stuck, her size working against her. "I can't. I'm stuck." The roof beam above her groaned ominously. Caleb didn't think. He climbed up, reached through the window, and grabbed her arms. Billy and Jack helped pull from below. They dragged her through just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. Vivienne fell on top of Caleb, both of them hitting the ground hard. For a moment, they just lay there, coughing and gasping. Then Vivienne started laughing, wild, borderline hysterical laughter mixed with tears.
We did it! We got them all out! All of them! Caleb held her as she cried and laughed, feeling her heartbeat racing against his chest. Around them, parents were gathering their children, crying with relief. Margaret Henley knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. You saved my Tommy. Again, you saved all of them. Other voices joined in, gratitude pouring from people who'd once wanted Vivienne gone. But Caleb was focused on one thing, the rage building in his chest. This wasn't an accident. Someone had blocked that door from outside. Someone had started this fire knowing children were inside. Where's Coleman? He asked, helping Vivienne to her feet. Here. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, his face dark with fury. This was deliberate. Multiple witnesses saw 3 men on horseback riding away right after the fire started. Crow. Has to be. He's making his final move, trying to break us completely. Then we end this, Caleb said. Tonight. We find him, and we end it. With what? We got maybe a dozen men who can fight, and half of them are injured. Then we fight with what we have. Vivienne grabbed his arm, her soot-covered face fierce. Not without me. You nearly died in there. And I'll die out there if that's what it takes to stop him. She looked around at the destroyed school, at the crying children, at the fear on every face. He did this because of me. I finish it. Before Caleb could argue, a rider came thundering into town from the south. One of the ranchers they'd posted as lookout. They're coming! Crow and at least 20 men! They're heading straight for town! Panic erupted. People screamed, grabbed their children, ran for their homes. Everyone who can fight, get your weapons, Coleman shouted. Women and children to the church. It's stone, hardest to burn. Chaos as the town mobilized. Caleb looked at Vivienne, saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. This is it, he said. This is it, she agreed. They had maybe 30 minutes before Crow arrived. 30 minutes to prepare for a battle they probably couldn't win. But they'd try anyway. Because that's what you did on the frontier. You fought, and if you died standing. The men took positions along the main street, behind water troughs, in second-story windows, anywhere that offered cover and a clear line of sight. Caleb counted heads, 14 men with guns, against 20 or more. The math was brutal. We can't win this straight up, Samuel said, checking his shotgun. His wounded leg was wrapped tight, but he refused to sit out. They'll overwhelm us in minutes. Then we don't fight straight up, Vivienne said. She was still covered in soot from the fire, her dress burned in places, but her mind was working. We use the town itself. Funnel them into kill zones, make them fight on our terms. Coleman looked at her skeptically. You got experience with this kind of thing? No, but I've read enough military history to know that smaller forces win by controlling terrain and psychology. She pointed down the street. They're expecting us to be terrified, disorganized. We give them the opposite. We make them cautious. How? Fire. Block the side streets with burning wagons. Make them come straight down the main road where we're waiting. They'll see the fires, see our positions, and they'll hesitate. Hesitation gives us time. It was desperate and probably wouldn't work. But nobody had better ideas. They spent the next 20 minutes setting up. Old wagons dragged into position and set ablaze. Men positioned on rooftops with rifles. The church bell rung to signal everyone who couldn't fight to take shelter. Vivienne worked alongside them, helping move barricades despite her exhaustion. Caleb tried to convince her to go to the church with the others. I'm not hiding, she said firmly. This is my fight. You can't even shoot. Then give me something else to do, but I'm staying. Caleb handed her his spare revolver. 6 shots. Point and pull the trigger. That's it. She took the gun with shaking hands. I've never shot anyone. Hope you don't have to start today. They took position behind the water trough outside the general store. From here they could see the entire main street and the dust cloud rising from the south where Crow's men were approaching. I'm scared, Vivienne said quietly. Me too. What happens if we lose? We don't think about that. Caleb, we don't think about that, he repeated, loading his rifle. We fight. We survive. That's all there is. The dust cloud grew closer. Caleb could see riders now, dark shapes against the afternoon sun. Too many of them. Hold your fire until I give the signal, Coleman shouted from his position. Make every shot count. The riders slowed as they entered town, seeing the burning wagons, the armed men in windows. Silas Crow rode at the front, his shoulders still bandaged from the last fight. His scarred face was twisted with rage. "You made a mistake, Mercer," Crow's voice echoed down the empty street. "Thought you could steal from me, destroy my operation? Now you're all going to pay." "You set fire to a school with children inside," Caleb shouted back. "You're done, Crow. Federal marshals are already on their way. Marshals won't get here in time to save you," Crow gestured to his men. "Kill everyone. Burn everything. I want this town erased from the map." The shooting started. Bullets tore through the air, shattering windows, splintering wood. Caleb fired back, his rifle bucking against his shoulder. Beside him, Vivienne ducked low, her hands over her ears. One of Crow's men went down, then another. But there were too many of them, spreading out, finding cover, returning fire with professional precision. "They're flanking us!" Billy Chen shouted from a rooftop. "East side!" Caleb saw them, 5 riders trying to circle around through the alley between the general store and the saloon. If they got through, they'd be behind the town's defenses. "I got them!" Samuel limped toward the alley, shotgun ready. But he was too slow, his wounded leg betraying him. One of the riders got a clear shot. Samuel went down hard. "No!" Vivienne was moving before Caleb could stop her, running toward the fallen man despite bullets whining past. Caleb cursed and followed, providing covering fire. They dragged Samuel behind a water barrel as rounds punched through the wood around them. "I'm okay," Samuel gasped, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. Just get back to position." "You're not okay," Vivienne said, already examining the wound. "It's bad. You need Doc Patterson." "Patterson's at the church. Can't get there without crossing open ground." More gunfire. Jack Morrison fell from his rooftop position, hitting the street with a sickening thud. He didn't get up. They were losing. Caleb could feel it. The slow erosion of their defense, men falling or running out of ammunition, Crow's forces pushing forward. "We need to fall back," Coleman shouted. "Everyone to the church!" The retreat was chaos. Men ran from their positions, some carrying wounded, all heading for the stone church at the end of the street. Bullets chased them, and Caleb saw 2 more go down before reaching safety. He and Vivienne helped Samuel through the church doors, just as Crow's men reached the main street barricades. Inside, the church was packed with terrified people. Women holding children, old men clutching hunting rifles. The wounded lying on pews, bleeding onto the wooden benches. Doc Patterson moved between them, his shaky hands doing what they could. But there were too many injuries, too much blood. "How many men do we have left?" Caleb asked Coleman. 8 able-bodied, maybe 10 if we count the injured who can still shoot. "And them?" 15, maybe more. And they've got us trapped." As if to prove the point, bullets started hammering against the church walls. The stone held, but the windows shattered, glass raining down on the people huddled inside. A child screamed, a woman sobbed. The fear was suffocating. Vivienne stood up, her soot-covered face visible to everyone. "Listen to me, all of you." The church went quiet. "We're not going to die here. We're not going to let that man destroy what we've built." Her voice was steady despite the gunfire outside. "But I need you to trust me. One more time." "Trust you?" Garrett stood up, his face twisted with anger and fear. "This is your fault. We should have handed you over weeks ago." "You're right. This is my fault." Vivienne didn't flinch from his accusation. "I brought Crow here. I put you all in danger, and I'm going to end it." "How?" "By getting us all killed." "By giving Crow what he wants. Me." "No," Caleb said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Listen to me." Vivienne turned to face him, her eyes clear and certain. "I go out there, offer myself in exchange for the town. He gets me, you all survive. He'll kill you the second he has you. Probably, but at least the rest of you will live. That's not a solution. It's the only solution we have left." Caleb grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You think I'm going to let you walk out there and die? After everything? After I made you care about me?" Her smile was sad. "I'm sorry for that, but this is the right thing to do." "The hell it is." "Caleb?" "No." He released her, turned to face the others. She's not going out there. We fight, all of us, together. With what? Someone shouted. We're out of ammunition. We're bleeding. We're dying. Then we die fighting instead of cowering. The argument erupted, fear and anger spilling over. People shouting, blaming, desperate for any solution that didn't end with everyone dead. Then Martha Sutton's voice cut through the chaos. The tunnel! Everyone turned to look at her. What tunnel? Coleman asked. Old mining tunnel under the church. Goes back to when this was all silver country. Martha pointed to a corner of the building. Opens up near the creek, about 200 yards from here. We could evacuate through it. Why didn't you mention this before? Because it's half collapsed and probably full of bad air. But it's better than dying here. Hope flickered in the room. A way out. Not a victory, but survival. But Vivienne was shaking her head. They'll see people coming out. They'll chase us down in the open. We need a distraction. What kind of distraction? Caleb asked, though he was starting to fear he knew the answer. The kind where someone walks out that front door and draws every eye. Vivienne met his gaze. Me. I go out there, negotiate, buy you time to evacuate. By the time Crow realizes what's happening, everyone's gone. And you're dead. Maybe, or maybe I'm smart enough to stall him long enough to slip away myself. It was a terrible plan, probably suicidal, but Caleb couldn't think of anything better. I'm going with you, he said. No, not negotiable. You want to do this? I'm beside you. Vivienne started to argue, then stopped. She nodded. Coleman organized the evacuation. Women and children first, then the wounded, then the remaining fighters would follow. Martha led them to the tunnel entrance, hidden behind a false wall in the basement. Give us 10 minutes, Vivienne said. Then start moving people through. You got 5, Coleman said. Any longer and they'll storm the church. Caleb and Vivienne walked to the front doors. Through the shattered windows, they could see Crow's men taking positions, preparing for a final assault. You ready? Caleb asked. No. You? Not even close. They pushed open the doors together and stepped into the late afternoon light. Crow was standing in the middle of the street, his gun drawn. When he saw Vivienne, his scarred face split into a vicious smile. Well, well, the coward finally shows herself. I'm here to negotiate, Vivienne called out, walking slowly forward. Caleb stayed beside her, his hand on his gun. You want me. Take me. Let the town go. You think I care about these people? Crow laughed. I'm going to kill you and burn this place to ash. That's what happens when people cross me. Then you'll never see your money. $5,000, remember? I know where it is. That stopped him. Greed flickered across his face. You're lying. I'm not. Before I left Boston, I hid it. Insurance policy. Vivienne's voice was steady, the lie flowing smoothly. You kill me. You never find it. You let these people go, I'll tell you where it is. Crow studied her, calculating. Behind him, his men shifted nervously. Even if I believed you, he said slowly, why would I honor that deal? Because you're a businessman. You didn't come all this way for revenge. You came for money. Vivienne took another step forward. $5,000. Plus whatever you can salvage from your ruined operation. That's better than nothing. Caleb could see Crow considering it. The man's eyes flicked to the church, to his men, back to Vivienne. How do I know you're not stalling? What would I be stalling for? You've got us trapped. We're out of ammunition, out of options. I'm offering you a way to get paid and walk away. Behind them, Caleb heard the faint sound of movement in the church. The evacuation had started. Just a few more minutes. Crow took a step closer, his gun still aimed at Vivienne's chest. Where's the money? Hidden in Boston. In my father's old office building, behind a loose brick in the basement. 3rd row from the bottom, 8 bricks from the left corner. It was specific enough to sound real. Crow's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. And I'm supposed to just trust you? You're supposed to make a smart business decision. Kill me, get nothing. Let me go. At least you have a chance at the money. I could torture the location out of you. You could try, but I've survived a lot worse than torture these past few weeks. Pain I can handle. It's the thought of innocent people dying that breaks me. Vivienne's voice dropped. So here's my offer, one last time. I go with you, quietly. No fight. You get your chance at the money. These people live. Everyone wins. Caleb's heart was hammering. He could see the calculation in Crow's eyes, weighing revenge against profit. Then Crow smiled. No deal. He raised his gun. Caleb drew faster, his bullet catching Crow in the chest before the man could fire. Everything exploded into violence. Crow's men opened fire. Caleb and Vivienne dove for cover behind an overturned wagon. Bullets tore through wood, kicking up dirt, shattering what was left of the street. Run! Caleb shouted at Vivienne. Get to the church. But Vivienne wasn't running. She had the revolver he'd given her, and she was firing back with shaking hands. Her shots went wild, but they made Crow's men duck for cover. Then, impossibly, there was more gunfire, but from behind Crow's position. Caleb risked a look and saw riders pouring into town from the south. 20, 30 men on horseback, all armed, all shooting at Crow's forces. Federal marshals, someone shouted. The marshals are here! The tide turned in seconds. Crow's men, caught between two forces, tried to fight but were quickly overwhelmed. Some threw down their weapons, others tried to run and were cut down. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Caleb stayed behind the wagon, his gun still raised, not quite believing what he was seeing. Beside him, Vivienne was crying, great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion. A tall man in a marshal's badge dismounted and walked toward them. Caleb Mercer. That's me. Marshal Hayes. Got a word about human trafficking and illegal smuggling in this territory. Looks like we arrived just in time. You have no idea. The cleanup took hours. Crow's men were rounded up, arrested, chained to wagons. The wounded were tended to, bodies were covered and carried away. Silas Crow lived barely. Caleb's shot had caught him in the chest but missed vital organs. He'd stand trial for his crimes, probably hang. The church evacuation was called off. People emerging from the tunnel to find their town still standing, their lives saved by the thinnest of margins. Jack Morrison was alive, hurt badly but alive. Samuel Brooks would recover. They'd lost 2 men in the fighting, 2 more who'd bled out before Doc Patterson could reach them. It could have been so much worse. As night fell, Caleb found Vivienne sitting on the boarding house steps, staring at nothing. She was still covered in soot and blood, her dress ruined, her hair a tangled mess. You should rest, he said, sitting beside her. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that gun pointed at us. See Crow's face. He's gone. It's over. Is it? She turned to look at him. 4 people died today, because of me, because of my debts and my mistakes. 4 people died because Crow was evil. That's not on you. Isn't it? Caleb took her hand. Listen to me. You've spent weeks blaming yourself for things that weren't your fault. Your father's business failing, that wasn't your fault. Crow being a monster, not your fault. Those men dying today, they chose to fight. They chose to protect this town. That's on them, not you. But, no buts. You want to honor those men? You live. You stay here and you build something good. You make their sacrifice mean something. Vivienne was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, I don't know if I can. You can. I've watched you do impossible things for a month now. This is just one more. Marshal Hayes found them there an hour later. He had questions, lots of them, about Crow's operation, about the trafficking, about the opium. Caleb and Vivienne answered them all, their story corroborated by dozens of witnesses. You're lucky to be alive, Hayes said when they finished. Both of you. That was a hell of a risk you took. Didn't have much choice, Caleb said. Maybe not, but you made the right calls. Hayes pulled out a document. Speaking of which, Miss Ashcroft, I need to discuss your legal situation. Vivienne paled. My debts. Your debts to Silas Crow are void. He was operating an illegal lending operation, charging interest rates that violate federal law. Any agreements you signed are null and void. What? You don't owe him anything. Legally, you never did. Hayes smiled. Also, there's a reward for information leading to the arrest of trafficking operations. $500. It's yours if you want it. Vivienne started laughing, that same wild, borderline hysterical laugh from the fire. I'm not in debt. I'm free? Free and clear, though you'll need to testify at the trial. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Hayes left them with instructions to report to the territorial courthouse in 3 weeks. When he was gone, Vivienne turned to Caleb with tears streaming down her face. "It's over. It's really over." "Yeah, it is." "What do I do now?" Caleb pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her substantial frame. "Now you figure out who you want to be, without the debts, without the fear. Just you." "I want to stay here. Is that crazy?" "Probably, but I want you to stay too."
"Even though I lied to you? Even though I'm not the woman you were expecting?" "Especially because you're not that woman. The woman I was expecting would have broken the first time someone mocked her, would have run the first time things got hard. You're not her. You're stronger." "I don't feel strong." "You saved 9 children from a burning building today. You stood up to a killer. You held this town together when it was falling apart. That's strong." Vivienne pulled back to look at him. "Are you going to ask me to marry you?" The question caught him off guard. Eventually, maybe. I haven't thought that far ahead." "Good, because I'm not ready for that yet. I need time to figure out who I am without being defined by some man, even a good man like you." "So what do you want?" "I want to work, help Doc Patterson with his practice, maybe teach at the school once it's rebuilt. I want to earn my place here for real." She hesitated. "But I also want, would you teach me to run the ranch? Really teach me, not just the basics?" "You want to be a rancher?" "I want to be capable, self-sufficient. I want to know I can survive out here on my own strength, not just by depending on someone else's kindness." Caleb nodded slowly. "I can do that. But it's hard work." "Everything worth doing is hard work. I'm learning that." They sat together on the steps as the town slowly came back to life around them. People emerged from hiding, started cleaning up damage, checking on neighbors. The resilience of frontier life, knocked down but not destroyed. Over the next few weeks, Black Hollow Ridge rebuilt. The school went up again, this time with stone walls that wouldn't burn. Morrison's barn was reconstructed with help from every able-bodied man in the settlement. The poisoned well was replaced with a deeper one that produced clear water. And Vivienne became part of the fabric of the town. She worked alongside Doc Patterson, learning proper medical care. She helped organize food distribution for families who'd lost supplies in the attacks. She taught reading and arithmetic to children in the temporary school. And 3 times a week, she rode out to Caleb's ranch and learned to work the land. It was brutal at first. Her body wasn't built for the constant physical labor, and she struggled with tasks that came easily to people who'd grown up doing them. But she kept at it, building strength and skill gradually. Caleb watched her transform. Not physically, she was still heavy, still moved with the same careful grace. But she carried herself differently, stood straighter, spoke with more confidence. One evening, 6 weeks after the final battle with Crow, they were mending fence together when Vivienne stopped and looked out over the valley. "I'm happy," she said, surprised by her own words. "For the first time in years, I'm actually happy." "Yeah? Yeah, it's strange. I have less than I did in Boston. Smaller house, harder work, fewer luxuries, but I'm happy." "That's because you're not just existing anymore. You're living." "When did you get so wise?" "I didn't. I just got honest." Caleb set down his tools. "For 5 years, I told myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anyone. But I was lying to myself. I was existing too, not living. And now? Now I'm starting to remember what living feels like." Vivienne smiled. "We're a mess, aren't we? 2 broken people trying to figure out how to be whole." "Maybe. But we're figuring it out together. That's got to count for something." The trial happened in early November. Caleb and Vivienne traveled to the territorial courthouse to testify against Crow and his organization. The evidence was overwhelming: the rescued women's testimony, the seized opium, financial records showing the illegal lending operation. Crow was sentenced to hang. His men got varying sentences, most of them long enough to ensure they'd never threaten anyone again. Walking out of the courthouse, Vivienne felt like she'd shed an invisible weight she'd been carrying for years. "It's really over," she said. "All of it." "All of it," Caleb agreed. They returned to Black Hollow Ridge to find the town planning a celebration. Not for the trial's outcome exactly, more for the simple fact that they'd all survived and were moving forward. The gathering was held at the rebuilt school. The whole community crammed into the new building.
There were speeches, awkward and heartfelt. Margaret Henley spoke about how Vivienne had saved her son twice. Doc Patterson talked about having a capable assistant for the first time in 20 years. Then Coleman stood up, his weathered face serious. We're a small town. We don't have much. But we got something most places don't. We got people who fight for each other, who stand up when it matters. He looked directly at Vivienne. Miss Ashcroft, you came here under false pretenses. You brought trouble to our door, but you also showed us what real courage looks like. You earned your place here. The room erupted in applause. Vivienne tried not to cry and failed completely. Later, when the celebration had quieted down, Caleb found her outside watching the stars. You okay? He asked. Better than okay. I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged, where people saw past my size, past my mistakes. They see you, the real you. Caleb hesitated, then said, I see you too, and I love what I see. Vivienne turned to face him, surprise clear on her face. You love me? I'm starting to. Is that okay? I think I'm starting to love you too. Is that crazy? After everything? Probably, but I'm okay with crazy. They stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, two imperfect people who'd found each other in the least likely way possible. Spring came to Black Hollow Ridge with wild flowers and new growth. Vivienne had moved to Caleb's ranch over the winter, not as his wife yet, but as his partner. They worked the land together, building something neither could have managed alone. The proposal came on an ordinary day in late April. They were checking fence line, covered in mud and sweat, when Caleb just said it. Marry me. Vivienne looked up from the post she was hammering. What? Marry me. Not because you need protection or because I need help with the ranch, just because I want to spend my life with you. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard. Fair point. She set down the hammer. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, on one condition. What's that? We're partners, equal partners, in everything. I wouldn't have it any other way. The wedding was simple. No fancy dress, no elaborate ceremony, just two people standing before the town that had once rejected them both, making promises they intended to keep. Vivienne wore a practical dress that Martha had helped her sew. Caleb wore his best shirt with the sleeves rolled up because he'd been working until the last minute. Coleman performed the ceremony, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. Do you, Caleb Mercer, take this woman to be your wife? I do. And do you, Vivienne Ashcroft, take this man to be your husband? I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the Wyoming territory, I pronounce you married. Kiss her before I change my mind. Caleb kissed her, not a gentle romantic kiss, but a real one, full of promise and imperfection. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful. People who'd once wanted her gone now welcomed her as family. Children who'd hidden from her now climbed on her lap, asking for stories. Late in the evening, Caleb and Vivienne slipped away from the party, riding back to their ranch under a sky full of stars. We did it, Vivienne said, leaning against him as the horse walked slowly homeward. We actually survived. More than survived. We built something. A life. A good life. Years later, travelers passing through Black Hollow Ridge would hear the story about the rancher who'd ordered a mail-order bride and got a woman who changed everything. About the woman who'd arrived carrying nothing but debts and lies, who'd become the heart of a community that once rejected her. Some versions made it romantic, adding details that never happened. Some made it more dramatic, turning Crow into a bigger villain than he was. But the core truth remained. Two people who should never have worked together built something stronger than either could have managed alone. Not because they were perfect, they never would be perfect, but because they were real with each other, honest, present. Vivienne never became thin. Her body stayed large, and she never apologized for it again. Instead, she proved every day that strength had nothing to do with size. That worth wasn't measured by appearance. She helped Doc Patterson establish a real medical clinic. She taught 3 generations of children to read. She worked the ranch alongside Caleb, her hands growing calloused and capable. And when people asked her about those early days, about the fear and rejection and violence, She would smile and say something that became part of her legend. The frontier doesn't care about your past. It only cares about what you're willing to become, Caleb would add, and what you're willing to fight for. Because that was the truth neither of them had understood when they started this journey, that you don't find your place in the world by being what others expect. You find it by being stubborn enough to stand your ground, brave enough to keep trying, and honest enough to let people see who you really are. The frontier broke most people who came to it unprepared, but sometimes, rarely, wonderfully, it forged them into something stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. Vivienne Ashcroft had stepped off that train as a desperate woman running from her mistakes. She became something far better, a person who stood firm, who fought for others, who proved that the greatest strength comes not from being unbreakable, but from standing back up every time you fall. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered on the frontier. Not whether you were beautiful or wealthy or came from the right family, just whether you had the courage to keep standing when everything tried to knock you down. Vivienne had that courage. So did Caleb. Together, they proved that sometimes the people who don't fit the mold are exactly the ones who change everything.